Afternoon. Welcome to the 84th meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-1, we are continuing our pre-budget consultations for 2012. I want to thank all the witnesses for joining us here today. We have two panels of witnesses. The first panel, we have 5 organizations who are presenting. We have Karen Leibovici from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Andrew Van Iterson, who's manager of the Green Budget Coalition, Terence Oakey, president of Merit Canada, Serge Bai, who's CEO of the National Association of Career Colleges, and Nobina Robinson, who's the CEO of Polytechnics Canada. We welcome all of you here today and look forward to hearing from you. You each have 5 minutes for your opening statements, and then we will have questions from the members. We'll begin with Ms. Leibovici.
Merci, bonjour. Thank you
very much. Good morning.
This afternoon on behalf of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, representing almost 2,000 member communities across this great country of ours, and we represent 90% of the Canadian population. Je tiens à vous remercier, vous.
I would like to thank all of you for creating jobs and making critical infrastructure repairs over the past few years.
Developing a new long-term infrastructure plan to replace the Building Canada plan, which expires in 2014. This new long-term plan is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build the on-ground conditions for a strong, growing, and competitive economy. It's also a chance to give Canadians what they need: good roads, clean water, and solutions to the traffic gridlock that cost our economy billions of dollars every year. There is no surer way to create jobs today and strengthen our economic foundations of tomorrow than investing in municipal infrastructure. And when provincial, territorial, and local partners bring money to the table, no other investment goes as far or achieves as much. With the right long-term plan, we can put an end to the long decline in Canada's municipal infrastructure once and for all. Mais nous devons le faire ensemble.
But we have to do it together, because local governments don't have the tools to do it alone.
This together. We own and operate 60% of Canada's core economic infrastructure, but we collect just 8 cents of every tax dollar paid in Canada. And in a couple of weeks, FCM will be releasing a formal proposal with fully costed recommendations. But in the short time that I have here today, I want to tell you where things stand right now. The government has said it will have new infrastructure programs in place for the 2014 construction season. And to meet that deadline, the new plan must be part of the 2013 federal budget and must be a plan that we can all endorse. Getting the plan ready and making sure it meets the needs of our economy and our communities has been FCM's top priority. We've worked with the government, other stakeholders, thousands of municipal leaders in every province and territory. And based on all that work, I want to share 3 points with you today. First, there is a broad support for an affordable plan that achieves the key federal objectives of supporting job creation and long-term economic growth, leveraging matching dollars from other orders of government, and expanding the private sector role where it benefits Canadians. Secondly, there is a strong agreement that the new plan must make the most of every tax dollar that we invest together, and it must show Canadians measurable improvements in the state of Canada's infrastructure, build the capacity of local governments to maximize efficiency through best practices and innovation, and minimize bureaucracy, red tape, and costly project delays. And the third and final and most important point is the new plan must make secure, reliable, and truly long-term investments in Canada's local infrastructure that are flexible enough to meet different regional needs. Every city and community is facing an infrastructure challenge. The nature of their needs may vary, whether it's roads, water, or traffic gridlock. But in every case, the solution is long-term planning and long-term funding. Without investments it can count on, no community can meet its infrastructure needs. And in a world full of economic uncertainty, Canadians want to know that we're taking action to build the conditions for a competitive economy and strong communities. And Canadians want to know that all orders of government are working together to make progress on practical priorities. The new long-term infrastructure plan must benefit Canadians. Les gouvernements locaux ont collaboré.
Local governments have worked closely with our partners in the last few years, and we want to keep working together for all Canadians.
On the road to jobs, growth, and a future we can count on. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Leibovici. And now we're going to hear from Andrew Van Eiderson from the Green Budget Coalition.
Mr. Chairman, honourable committee members, thank you for inviting the Green Budget Coalition to speak to you today. I am pleased to be joined by Nathan Lempers and the Gray Suit with the Pembina Institute, and I expect Alison Woodley, the National Conservation Director for CPAWS, the Canadian Wilderness Society, to be here later, who can all answer your questions. The Green Budget Coalition, or GBC, is unique in that we bring together the expertise of 16 of Canada's leading environmental and conservation groups, collectively representing over 600,000 Canadians, including groups like Ducks Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, the Pembina Institute. Our mission is to present an analysis of the most pressing issues regarding environmental sustainability in Canada and to make a consolidated annual set of recommendations to the federal government regarding strategic fiscal and budgetary opportunities. Now, please note that my presentation today reflects revisions and more details to the sort of brief online submission that we made at the start of August, and that all the details were in this preliminary set of recommendations which we sent to you on September 25th and again last Thursday. We want to thank the government again for its progress in Budget 2012, including funding for renewing the Species at Risk Act, funding for the Great Lakes, the Rouge Urban National Park, and Lake Winnipeg, and these are all important steps forward. To build on this progress for Budget 2013, we have identified and developed 4 feature recommendations, as well as 7 complementary recommendations. Our feature recommendations address the National Conservation Plan, subsidy reform in the extractive industries, green infrastructure in First Nations communities, and federal environmental law and science capacity. Firstly, we are recommending that Canada's National Conservation Plan, a throne speech commitment that was affirmed by the House Environment Committee's report in June, focus on scaling up efforts to value and conserve nature for the benefit of current and future generations of Canadians, and on ensuring all parties work together in a coordinated way to achieve this goal. And we have specific recommendations addressing oceans, national parks, and migratory birds. Secondly, to build further on the government's subsidy reform momentum and to increase tax neutrality and support the government's strategy of responsible resource development, the GBC recommends 3 targeted measures: enabling the Canadian exploration expense only for unsuccessful exploration, removing the accelerated capital cost allowance for the mining sector, as the government has done for the oil sands, and not renewing the mineral exploration tax credit for flow-through shares. These were all identified as subsidies for potential reform by the Deputy Minister of Finance in a March 2010 memorandum. Thirdly, there are major opportunities to further pursue economic, health, and quality of life benefits for First Nations communities by integrating green infrastructure thinking into the programs and policies that are needed for planning, building, updating, and repairing First Nations infrastructure. While progress has been made in many First Nations communities, there is still dire needs around improving drinking water systems and housing stock. Our recommendations address water and wastewater systems, deep measure residential and non-residential energy conservation and efficiency programs, and reducing dependence on diesel fuel through increased green energy use. And fourthly, we want to emphasize that the Government of Canada's environmental laws and science capacity are fundamental to its ability to protect Canadians' economic prosperity, health, and quality of life, and the ecosystems and natural resources on which they depend. To support these laws and science capacity, the GBC recommends establishing a comprehensive, web-accessible, and continually updated database of all federal environmental enforcement and compliance data, and financially supporting the provinces and territories where intergovernmental agreements are in place to effectively deliver environmental laws in their jurisdictions. We also have further complementary recommendations in our document addressing energy sustainability, climate action, and healthy communities, including Canada's infrastructure future, as my colleague recently just highlighted, and we will send you our final recommendations near the end of November. So to close, I just want to quote the man who will be delivering the budget, I assume, 4 or 5 months from now, the Minister of Finance, who he emphasized that the environment and the economy are inextricably linked, and that by ensuring that Canada has a clean and healthy environment, we will be able to build an economy strong enough to maintain the enviable standard of living that Canadians have come to expect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Eiderson. And now we're looking forward to hearing from Terence Oakey from Merit Canada.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to add Merit Canada's voice to the pre-budget consultations. You'll be pleased to know that unlike many organizations and witnesses you've heard at this committee in the past, I am not here to seek more government spending or more of your money. I am here, though, to ask for your assistance in ensuring that the money you do spend creates maximum value for taxpayers and creates more jobs. First, a little bit about Merit Canada. We are the national voice of Canada's 8 provincial open shop construction associations. Open shop companies and their workers build more than 70% of the industrial, commercial, and residential construction projects from coast to coast. Simply put, employees in open shop companies build Canada, and we are proud of their record. I'm here today to speak to an issue of fairness for hundreds of thousands of these workers in an industry that choose not to belong to the Building Trades Union. Some of those workers may choose to be union-free or belong to another union, such as the Christian Labour Association or other independent unions. Unfortunately, in many cases, these workers are barred from working on projects that are funded with their federal tax dollars. Our message is very simple. When government funds infrastructure, all qualified contractors should be allowed to bid on those projects. Unlike the Building Trades Union, we are not asking for rules to be written so our employees have a greater chance of working on these projects. We just want the ability to compete. We believe that fair and open competition is what ensures the best project for the best price. As you're probably aware, a degree in economics is not needed to understand what happens when you shut out 70% of the construction industry from competing on public infrastructure. Costs increase and quality decreases. Some U.S. studies suggest that closed tendering rules increase the cost of construction between 12 and 18%. And federal procurement rules would never allow these type of union-only schemes for projects that it exclusively funds. But this is not true across the country. Far too many jurisdictions have rules that limit competition. For example, the federal government recently contributed $28 million in stimulus funding to a project in the city of Hamilton. Of the approximately 260 qualified contractors, only 17 had workers registered with the proper union that the city rules require. So the other 243 contractors, or 94% of the available workforce, some of your constituents, were not even allowed to bid on this project. We believe this is unfair and only serves to increase costs and keep some of your constituents from working on these projects. Recent media reports about the Toronto District School Board's problems with repair work show all too well the consequences of such restrictive bidding. Costs are inflated, such as $143 to install a pencil sharpener, and productivity is reduced, as bills were inflated to pay for people who didn't even bother to show up for work. Taxpayers are ultimately the ones left paying the price. Closed tendering rules ultimately harm workers. Companies they work for aren't even allowed to bid on these projects, and we must remember that it is their tax dollars that are paying for these projects. Therefore, those employees are at a significant disadvantage. All Canadians pay for federally funded projects. Therefore, we believe that all Canadians should have at least an opportunity to provide for services that these tax dollars pay for. It makes no sense for federal funds to be spent with restrictions put in place that would never be allowed for a project that was exclusively funded by the federal government. In the end, fewer projects get funded and fewer jobs are created. We all have a responsibility to hardworking Canadian taxpayers to ensure that government spends, that each dollar that government spends goes as far as possible. Therefore, our members feel that the federal government should ensure that all construction projects financed with federal funds be tendered in an open and competitive manner and not allow union-only schemes that simply drive up the cost and harm the majority of workers in the industry. The Canada-Nova Scotia Building Canada Fund Communities Agreement could easily serve as a template. Let me quote from that agreement under Schedule A under mandatory criteria. Quote, "The contract award process will be competitive, fair, and transparent. For example, no sole source contracts and no union-only processes," end quote. Our members and their employees could not agree more with this language, and we think this clause should be inserted in all agreements with the federal government. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Oakey. Now we're hearing from Serge Bai from the National Association of Career Colleges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you for allowing the National Association of Career Colleges to make this presentation on such an important issue, the 2013 budget, and how it can help our country move forward. Let me first thank this committee and this government for the work it has done in previous budgets, especially the measure that in 2011 enhanced and expanded the eligibility for the Canada Student Loan and Grant Program for part-time and full-time students. For the past 116 years, the association has represented career colleges in Canada. We are the oldest post-secondary educational association in our country. We represent over 500 career colleges located throughout our country. Career colleges in Canada feel a need. They train students for jobs that exist. Our students range in age, social, economic, and ethnic background. They're the young person coming out of high school that wants a career in the skilled tradesperson, the unemployed single mother that would like a career in office administration, or the lawyer trained in another country that wants to use his legal knowledge and become a paralegal in Canada. The average student is 29 years of age, and while their backgrounds differ, they are all united by the same desire to succeed in a new career and have a better life. Our 160,000 students have chosen to attend our institutions. They've made a conscious decision that is based on the access of our programs in the region they reside, the type of programs offered, the quality of the institution, and the availability of condensed programs. A graduate from MC College Group, based in Edmonton, Mr. Chairman, is well known for being the hairdresser of a number of senior ministers in Ottawa. Des diplômés de l'industrie très basse remportent régulièrement.
Graduates from the Très Basse Institute regularly win prestigious awards such as Jutras and Grammys, and one of them has even ended up as Céline Dion's manager.
Platforms near the shores of Newfoundland, in the skilled trade sector in Saskatchewan and Alberta, in healthcare in British Columbia, and in business in Ontario. Our members' programs are accredited by professional bodies such as the Law Society of Upper Canada, the Canadian Medical Association, and many others. Employers come to us as our members' programs are current. Their instructors still work in their profession, and their graduates are uniquely qualified to immediately apply their skills in their new careers. We are a dream partner to a government that wishes to get unemployed Canadians back to work, or that wants to help underemployed Canadians obtain more productive positions. You would think that we would support students that wish to quickly re-enter the workforce by upgrading their skills and attend institutions that offer condensed programs. However, that's not the case. The Canada Student Grant Program will offer a grant to a student that wishes to attend a program of 60 weeks or more in length. But low and medium income students that attending institutions that offer a condensed programs that allow students to graduate within 60 weeks are not eligible for the Canada Student Grant Program. We believe that needs to be changed. In a society increasingly focused on getting things done now and a very competitive world, it is our opinion that the government should be encouraging students to get back to work faster and not discriminate against them. What's the cost? We estimated that this measure would actually benefit the government by diminishing reliance on social assistance programs and by allowing Canadians to become faster and more productive members of the Canadian society and therefore pay more taxes. We presented a proposal to HRSDC and, to date, they have not contradicted our numbers. Actually, it was fairly well received. Our members are regulated by provincial governments. They do not receive grants or contribution, and they do pay taxes. We're not asking for a special deal. We're just asking for fairness for our students. We're asking that you help us get our students to employers that need to fill jobs in important sectors such as the skilled trades, the healthcare, and the IT sectors. On another topic, we know that this government has put a special emphasis on attracting international students to Canada, and we agree. But if this committee is going to make a recommendation regarding the funding of the government strategy to attract international students, we hope that the recommendation will include a statement about the need to include funding for the private educational sector. Too often, our sector is ignored or receives crumbs compared to our colleagues in the public sector. However, an international student attending a career college benefits Canada the same way than if he or she attended a public institution. When the government states it wishes to promote education, it should state that clearly, and it should state that the private education sector should not be ignored or given ridiculously low support when it comes time to fund initiatives. In conclusion, we respectfully ask that this committee recommend that the 2013 budget include measures to 1. Reduce the number of weeks for the Canada Student Grant Program to match the Canada Student Loan Program. 2. Fund a strategy to recruit international students with no difference between the public and private sector. Merci.
Thank you.
From Ms. Robinson from Polytechnics Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My greetings to the members of the committee as you undertake your important annual deliberations. I'll dispense with the 101. You have our final submission from August about Polytechnics Canada and our members. Polytechnics Canada suggests the urgent priorities that you must consider are the talent needs of our employers and the innovation needs of Canadian firms. The 5 targeted solutions we propose are designed to link the benefits of the polytechnic model of applied education to the persistent challenges of innovation and of skills. The talent I refer to is the people who innovate, make high-value products, deliver high-quality services for the country, and work at jobs that will stay here. Currently, federal programs are doing a poor job of supporting these people. The firms that I refer to are the 1.1 million small and mid-sized firms in all industrial sectors with an average of 6 to 7 employees who need encouragement to grow, to commercialize products and services, and who are underperforming when it comes to global competition. Many of the challenges of skills mismatch and innovation lag emerge from policies and programs that exclude these people and businesses from access to important government support, either through benign neglect or outdated assumptions, and frankly, models that no longer work. Let me list a few of these broken models and suggest the fixes. That basic research alone will get you innovation is a broken model. Canada does a poor job of commercializing the results of billions of dollars invested in basic research each year. The current 20-year-old model of academic industry partnerships pushes ideas onto the private sector, whether they have asked for them or not, in hopes that industry will be able to turn them into commercial successes. Yet the payoffs are elusive. The next budget needs a laser-like focus on business innovation. The first fix is to invest in the SOL program in the Granting Council suite that addresses market pull, solving industry-identified problems. That is the College and Community Innovation Program administered by NSERC. And it is bursting at the seams. The very modestly funded program cannot keep up with demand from industry for applied research solutions that colleges provide. A modest $15 million increase in CCIP's budget will enable the program to meet the backlog of demand from SMEs forced to put innovation on hold because the program ran out of annual funding. A second fix for innovation is the National Voucher Program for late-stage commercialization support at approved R&D service providers. SMEs are cash-strapped. The SHRED tax credit doesn't cover late-stage applied research. Investors won't open their wallets unless there's a guaranteed return. Commercialization vouchers require companies to put a skin in the game, leverage that contribution to get the R&D project done on an accelerated timeline, and get the innovations to market where customers with cash in hand are waiting. It works in Alberta, in other provinces as well. It is used by the Dutch and the Australians. A national version with national definitions but delivered regionally will help Canada bridge the commercialization gap. The OECD recommends this. Now, to turn to skills. The brain drain is no longer the problem. It's yesterday's fight that today's programs are still trying to win. Critical concerns abound about the complex labor market conditions facing new entrants to the labor force, chiefly the low completion rate for mature learners, enrolled in our apprenticeship programs, and the lack of connection to the work world for graduates of general arts and science university programs. The fix? We need to develop the same sense of urgency for the skills shortage that we had for the brain drain of the 90s. The mistake back then was leaving skilled tradespeople on the sidelines when all the investments were targeted at post-secondary attainment and building top talent. As we advocated last year, we need to treat apprentices as post-secondary learners, not employees, and provide them with access to the same supports as other students receive. 3 specific fixes: adjust the terms of the Canada Student Loans Program, offer tax credits to companies willing to see an apprentice through to completion of their certification, ensure that procurement projects award points to firms that maintain registered apprentices as part of their teams. Finally, the bias that BA degrees are the purview of the university sector alone needs to be broken. There are today 144 bachelor degrees on offer by the entire college sector. Those students should be eligible for the same support for other undergraduates, be it through Granting Council research awards or international scholarships. I know that some of you have been inquiring about the German model of post-secondary education and training. Features of that German approach to talent development that are relevant to our considerations are a highly differentiated education sector that is responsive to the needs of industry, an economy that values practical experience and instruction and respects applied education. As with Germany, Canada needs a manufacturing culture that is built on engaging a wider pool of talent for innovation. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robinson, and thanks to all of you. And now we're going to have the questions from members. On va commencer avec Monsieur Caron.
We're going to begin with Mr. Caron. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for your presentations. It was very interesting and very varied. I'm going to begin with Ms. Libovici. Congratulations, by the way, for your assessment on infrastructure. I found that very interesting, very complete, especially in terms of the needs of municipalities. I have a question for you. You talked about a $20 billion bill right away for infrastructure that includes roads, sewer systems, wastewater, and transportation in general. That includes bridges as well. So over how much time would you see that amount being staggered? Because obviously we would give you $20 billion in a year, but are you thinking 4, 5, 6 years, or what is the timeline?
The timeline that we're looking at is somewhere between 15 to 20 years in terms of our long-term infrastructure program. When you look at asset managers and what makes sense, it is more than a 3-year or 5-year program. Assets that we're looking at developing are for a much longer period of time in terms of how long they're around. A bridge, for instance, lasts 50, 60, 70 years. So when we're saying long-term, we mean a long-term infrastructure program. I'm not sure where that $20 billion figure is coming from, and so perhaps you can clarify. I know when we've talked about wastewater, we've indicated that our initial calculations on what it will take over a 30-year period to meet the wastewater demands in this country is somewhere within a $20 to $40 billion range. So I'm not sure where your $20 billion is coming from.
Non, ben, c'est de votre présentation, mais je pense.
I thought it was in your presentation, but I thought that there was the immediate bill for the most pressing needs for municipalities right now. That's what I thought. Now, if we talk about $20 billion right away, we're talking about replacement infrastructure programs over the longer term, and we need not only to restore what is currently in a poor state of repair, we need to upgrade that, but also we need to ensure that we can ensure the quality of infrastructure in general. So if we're talking about a 15, 20, or 30-year plan, that might be an ideal timeline. What you are suggesting is only for municipalities. Everything that is, for example, between municipalities, for example, highways, something. that is not paid for by municipalities, that amount then of money would go quite a bit further. So you are only referring to municipalities, I believe.
What we're referring to is municipalities, but we're also referring to a partnership. We really believe this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to work together with provincial, territorial governments, other stakeholders in looking at what our infrastructure needs are for the long term. And determining what the appropriate amount will be in order to meet those long-term needs. We also believe that we need to be able to show how we're making progress in meeting the infrastructure deficit that we have across the country, and having a measurable is very much part of meeting that particular need as well.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have? So very swiftly, Mr. Van Eydersen, you know that there is a game being played ever since we have resumed in Parliament in September. There are three ways of dealing with climate change. We have a carbon policy. One is a carbon tax, which was favored by the Liberals in 2008. And that consists in applying a carbon tax. The other is a cap and trade and a carbon market, which was something put forward by the NDP. And the third would be regulation on a sector-by-sector basis that the Conservatives have decided to set up, which is not free either, because the partial costs to date have been evaluated by Maclean's and other organizations as more than $16 billion. Would you say that the regulatory method on a sector-by-sector basis as advocated by the government is the solution to go with? Or should we have a price on carbon as put forward by the NDP, which would be in the form of a tax?
Thanks, Guy, for your question. I think we appreciate that the government is making efforts to deal with climate change, and as we've also said, I believe a price on carbon, be it via carbon tax or cap and trade, would be a more efficient, cost-effective way to more quickly and rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions across Canada.
Est-ce que vous pourriez élaborer?
Give us some more detail, please. Why is this? It's finished? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
And now we're going to hear from Ms. McLeod.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the members. I'd like to start my questions focused in on Federation of Canadian Municipalities and some of the issues around infrastructure. And certainly as a former mayor, I remember waiting desperately for a program to come along when you had needs. So I think the fact that we had, a very significant program and that we've started the planning for the next one is going to be very significant. So I'm really pleased with that. I also recall with our economic action plan a number of very, very important programs that needed to be done, but I can also remember the municipalities and the provincial government saying, halt, we have no capacity to, so they were actually not in a position. Is that, could you talk briefly in terms of the provinces and the municipalities, and are there some challenges there that are going to come to fruition as we look at the long-term infrastructure planning?
Definitely, it's one of the aspects that we've been working with with our membership as well as with provincial and territorial governments. What I think makes this long-term infrastructure plan different is that we've had the time to plan for the long-term infrastructure plan. In the past, there hasn't been as much lead time to work with our provincial and territorial partners as well as with the federal government in developing a plan that meets the long-term needs of municipalities across the country. So that really is a key element in working together in partnership to develop something that will work.
So I appreciate that. So when the opposition are saying spend money now, you are actually feeling that to do it comprehensively, methodically is going to be helpful. And of course, it's not in the too distant future that we hope to roll out the next phase. The other thing I'd like you to talk briefly about, you did mention P3 within your opening comments, and you also talked about red tape and bureaucracy, and perhaps you can share a little bit in terms of what that does to municipal projects in terms of the ability to move forward in a timely way.
And again, that's part of looking at what the new long-term plan will be at the end of the day. We recognize that there's sometimes an overlap of responsibilities and an overlap of roles, and we feel very strongly that there are many times when we have to submit forms that, in fact, duplicate work that's been done before. What we found through the Economic Action Plan was that we were able to submit the forms that were required in order to obtain the money, and in fact, everything worked very smoothly. So it's very much an issue of cutting through that red tape, but also looking at what, in fact, we are going to require together to build the foundation that we need for the new long-term plan.
And I'm sure we'll have you with C45 in terms of navigable waters as an example, but that's a conversation for another day, because I'm sure you have, as an organization, lots to say. If I have another quick minute, Mr. Bai, you said less than 60 weeks. Are you talking 10 weeks, 20 weeks? What is the normal length for your programs?
Thank you. It varies immensely around, depending on the trade or depending on the sector. What we're looking at, Madam McLeod, is that you're looking at the Canada Student Loan Program right now, which funds programs that start at 4 weeks. So what we're saying is, on one side, the federal government recognizes programs that can be very short, and on another side, with the grants, it does not recognize those programs. So I would say that the average program at a Canadian Career College is about 26 weeks. That would be the average. But our position is that to make it easy for the federal government, that the federal government shouldn't be looking at program A, B, and C and start creating a whole bureaucracy to evaluate programs. It already recognizes program. It is 4 weeks with the Canada Student Loan Program. Why doesn't it take the same measure with a program that is a sister program to the Canada Student Grant Program and use that?
Do I have more time?
One pays it back.
I've got about 20 seconds.
Okay, I won't push it. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. McLeod. I will be taking the next round, and I'd like to start with a question from Ms. Leibovich on the issue of infrastructure and funding. Most programs, and going back quite a long time, have required 3 levels of government to invest equal amounts, and that has been a way to help validate projects, the municipal and the provincial, so I understand that. But with the disparate fiscal positions of Canadian provinces and the growing fiscal imbalance between individual provinces, recently the report that came out from the Macdonald-Laurier group on this issue, is there a risk that federal money will only go to provinces that are in really good fiscal condition, and potentially that we make the gap between provinces greater if we continue to rely purely on this formula or this approach?
Again, this is an opportunity for us all to work in partnership towards an end goal, and the end goal is to be able to provide a good infrastructure for Canadians across the country. We've been working very closely through our provincial and territorial associations with provincial and territorial governments to look at what makes sense within their own jurisdictions in regards to the rollout of the new plan. We are hopeful that the new plan will be in place, that we will know what it is in Budget 2013. It's very important for us to know that so we don't miss the construction season. And then the arrangements between the provincial territorial governments and ourselves can then take place at that point in time, and the federal government.
But are you hearing from some of your members in provinces like Quebec or Nova Scotia that have a very different fiscal situation than, say, provinces like Alberta, that in fact we should be concerned about federal money only being made available to those provinces that can afford to match those investments?
What's interesting is that in Kananaskis, when the ministers of municipal affairs met in, I think it was June or July of this year, that in fact they all were able to come to the same conclusion in support of the need for a long-term infrastructure plan. And that was very encouraging for us in the municipal sector to hear. I've had an opportunity to meet with some of those ministers in the last couple of months, and they have all been very supportive of the fact that we need a long-term infrastructure plan.
Thank you. Mr. Bai, and I think also I have a question for Ms. Robinson too in terms of learning. Mr. Bai, your members are all regulated. They're through provincial organizations across the country.
Provincial governments, they're regulated by provincial governments. Yes.
And similar standards across the country. Most provinces and territories very similar standards.
It's fairly similar, but as an example, the programs have to be approved by the provincial government. So and there is a number of standards.
So when you suggest that perhaps student grant programs and other federal funding made available to post-secondary students be made available to your members, it's not a free-for-all. Your members are already part of regulated bodies through the provincial government. So that's important for the committee to recognize that these private colleges are in fact already regulated and have to perform to certain standards.
The regulations are immense, Mr. Bryce, and they from having your programs registered and reviewed by the provincial government. The instructor has to be approved by the provincial government. Every career college has to put in funds on the side by the provincial governments, etc.
Oh, thank you very much. And Ms. Robinson, your reference to the German model and to apprenticeships is something that I think a number of members of the committee are quite interested in. We have the situation now with people without jobs and jobs without people, and that skills gap is significant and growing, and also challenges with young people in terms of opportunities. Do you believe that this is something that we need a national learning agenda working with provinces, and it should be a more robust approach taken in terms of federal leadership? There's no constitutional barrier to federal leadership in this area.
Well, the whole national strategy issue, we hear it every year, and yet it doesn't happen. So I'm becoming more and more into sort of a pragmatic about what can we do within the fact that there is this shared jurisdiction. So one of the things I think is we should look to the UK and look to Australia, and not just Germany, because Germany is a very different model. You can't just transport Germany into the Canadian model. And convene expert panels for the problems that we're trying to solve. So if the problem is skills shortage, every Tom, Dick, and Harry will tell you that there's a skills shortage. But what kind of skills shortage? Now we're getting into where the shortage is. It's in the trades. Yep. It's in skilled production workers, technicians, technologists. Let's convene expert panels to go at those sorts of issues.
And restore the honor of skilled trades in Canada. Thank you very much. And now we're going to hear from Mr. Hoback.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to welcome you all here this afternoon. It's great to see you. I'm actually going to direct my questions to Mr. Oakley and Ms. Libovici. I apologize for that, because they'll be kind of referring to one or the other. Mr. Oakley, you talked about transparency in the tendering process, and of course you understand a lot of times the federal government is just a sole provider of the financing for a tender, and then the province or the municipality will go out and actually be the contractor, for lack of a better word, in the tendering process. How would you see the government getting involved to that level, or how do you see that working? What would that look like?
Well, there's numerous examples where the federal government does insist on that. I referenced the Nova Scotia agreement. There's many that involve the province of Alberta. So for our perspective, it's simply including a provision that would not allow union-only contracting to ensure that the majority of the industry was able to bid on those projects. And it's in many agreements now, so it's not something that would be new.
So this is something that the government's doing in other areas, is it fair to say?
Well, and with certain provinces.
Okay. Ms. Libovici, in that scenario, how would the municipalities react if the government put in a provision such as that transparency tenderism didn't have any type of selection process, whether it was union or non-unionized, it went to the best person, best qualified, best price? How do you see that working through your network?
What we're looking for in terms of the plan is that it's long-term, it's sustainable, and that it's flexible to meet the needs of the individual municipalities. And again, those are details that would need to be worked out in terms of the plan on a go-forward basis.
I don't mean to cut you off and only get 5 minutes, but as far as the municipalities that you represent, how would they react if the federal government was to come down and say, okay, we want to make sure the tendering process is done in such a way that everybody's included in the tendering? How would you react to that scenario?
Again, municipalities have their own needs that they meet, and within each province those needs are different as well, and the trade agreements are different too. So I think that's something that we would need to obviously look at, and again, the key with regards to the long-term infrastructure plan is that it has to be able to meet the needs of the individual municipalities, which may well be different than the needs on a national basis.
Can you give me a reason why we wouldn't include an open tendering process, or why there needs to be a tender where only union members are allowed to bid on a project?
Again, municipalities have autonomy when it comes to certain areas, and again, in terms of the individual circumstances of a municipality that may wish to have a different tendering process, that is allowable under all the trade agreements that we currently have. It might be something that they need to have.
So it's fair that some municipalities might have trade agreements with the unions already that insist on union-only shops being able to bid on jobs within the...
I couldn't answer that.
Okay.
It may well be.
I'm just trying to think of an example of why we, and maybe Mr. Marsden, you might be able to help me on that, why there would be a situation as such that only unionized workers would be allowed to bid on a job. Again, I have a hard time understanding that. And it could be ideology, and that's fair, but in the same breath, we have only so many dollars to spend every year, and we want to be as most efficient with that money as possible, yet still provide the services that Canadians have come to expect. And I say you can do it with a unionized shop or without a unionized shop. I'm not making a preference either way.
Right.
I'm just trying to figure out why we would be gerrymandering a tendering process to favor one over the other. Mr. Oakley.
That's exactly what I'm here to convey is we're not asking for rules that would only allow our members or the open shop sector to bid. We just want the ability to compete and let the best bid win.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Hoback, and now we're going to start with a new round, starting with Mr. Marsden.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Oakley. I think that we probably could have a fairly spirited discussion around unionized shops, since I was 44 years in the trade union movement before coming here. But the one thing I would comment on is you mentioned the Hamilton contract, and where I represent Hamilton and Hamilton East, I really have to speak to the fact that, good, solid union wages build our city. And good union wages put our workers' kids through college and through universities, in a lot of instances where they would not have been able to do that. But I don't want to get into that because, as I say, we could have a coffee and do that sort of thing. Who do you see as your direct competitors? Other companies? Or from listening to your presentation, it sounded like you were describing unions as your direct competitors as opposed to companies.
No, in terms of this specific issue that I'm talking about with open tendering, certain people that we compete with have gerrymandered the system where we can't actually compete with them, so they're not our competition. Generally, Merit Canada doesn't have necessarily competition. Each of our members goes out into their local market to build buildings and build schools, and they compete locally, sometimes with other open shop companies, sometimes with union shops. As the market works, sometimes they win those competitions, sometimes they lose. Well,
just as you were likely very aware, just last week we were having a discussion here studying Bill C-377.
Yes.
I wish you'd have been here for that.
I'll be here next week on that.
So. Oh, great. Well, I'll tip my hand right now. Have you been engaged in ongoing lobbying activities relative to this?
Yes, all of my meetings that I've had with MPs from the Conservative end. Oh, sorry.
I'm sure that you would tell us the truth. I wasn't implying that you were hiding anything. Don't misunderstand me. I mean, we just don't have a record sitting in front of us.
Okay, I can provide it. I actually brought it with me because I anticipated
no, that's
the
fine.
question.
Your answer is fine with me. I'm not. We're not in headhunting here or anything like that. I was just curious about. Could you for the benefit of the committee, describe your business model, how you function relative to the jobs that you put in the field, the controls and that you would have.
Sure. Well, just to be clear, Merit Canada we're not a construction company. We're an association of 8 provincial open shop construction associations. So we represent every province other than Quebec, as you may or may not know, but open shop construction is not allowed in Quebec. It's all union. If you don't have a union card, you can be fined or jailed in the province of Quebec, which is unfortunate. But so we don't represent anyone in that province. But we represent workers in every other province, other than Prince Edward Island, which is something we are currently addressing as well.
Well, how much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
You've got around 2.25 minutes.
Well, that's okay. That worked pretty well. You were kind of questioning earlier the relationship that some governments have with unions, a closed shop. That let's speak to Ontario. You have a legal right in Ontario as an organization to negotiate those.
Absolutely, and we respect that.
And the reason that began, to go back to Mr. Hoback's question, was for a long time you had a superior skill level with the unionized workers, because as part of being a part of a union, you had your training in-house, and you got to a Red Seal level of training, which provided a broad range of skill sets that many people would like to use and contract in for the long term. They don't represent the housing, they just represent the construction trades for big developments and manufacturing. But putting that on the table, nobody's saying that your workers that you employ are not skilled workers, but that was the reason for those original contracts, was to lock them in. And the other problem you have, as we know in the eastern part of the country, is the loss of these workers headed west now. And so there's a real effort on the part of unions to match up the work here that still needs to be done, and so there's plenty of work to go around now. I think that does my time.
Yeah, you've got
want me to
20 seconds.
Do you want me to respond to? No.
Okay, Mr.
Yeah, that's
Roque,
fine
you
if you
wanna-
feel.
Well, no, just to respond quickly, I mean, merit contractor associations across the country spend millions of dollars on apprenticeship training. We also support public training that ensures that all of our workers are held to the same high standard that in any closed shop.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Roque, Mr. Marston, and now Mr. Adler.
Thank you. And thank you for being here, witnesses. I want to pursue my initial line of questioning with Ms. Libovici. You mentioned in your submission that the property tax is sort of a 19th century tool, and I would tend to agree with you there. The sort of golden era for Canadian cities, I guess, lasted up until about 25 years ago. I remember certainly in Toronto, where we had garbage pickup twice a week, recycling once a week, city services were all there, all free, well, pay through the property tax. But for a variety of reasons over the last 20, 25 years or so, cities are finding themselves with less and less cash. Now, as you know, Toronto now, within the 416, the land transfer tax is double. And so they've been able to generate a lot of money through the doubling of the land transfer tax. But cities are having to become more and more creative in ways to raise revenue in order to deliver the services that the citizens require. We see also in Toronto that they're talking about a casino to raise money. Could you just talk a bit about the ways in which the cities are going to have to think outside of the box in terms of raising revenues to maintain the existing infrastructure, but also to expand the infrastructure that they have currently, plus maintain a quality of life that the citizens of each city has become accustomed to. Could you just please discuss that a bit? I know it's a big.
That's a tall order, and
question. I know.
I think 5 minutes or however much time that we have, You're right in terms of the property tax base. The way the cities raise revenue is an old model, and there's lots of discussion happening with our provincial governments with regards to different forms of revenue sharing. With regards to the infrastructure plan, one of the areas that we're looking at is the asset management capabilities of communities across this country. And if we can measure and define what the condition of assets are across the country, then in fact we can start to look at how do we deal with the infrastructure deficit that's there. Not all municipalities are doing that now. However, it's something that is starting and is a good move forwards. I think Ms. McLeod had mentioned 3 Ps. Not a solution to every way to go forward with a project, but is perhaps one way that can be looked at in terms of moving forward with meeting our infrastructure needs. And obviously some thinking out of the box, looking at innovative ways to do that, and hopefully that will be part of a new plan as well.
Are there any examples that you have seen of cities that have come up with, unique, innovative ways in order to raise revenue?
Well, I don't know if it's unique, but I know in my own city of Edmonton, we have analyzed what our infrastructure needs are, and in fact, we have a tax that is a line item for meeting our infrastructure needs for neighborhoods throughout the city of Edmonton. Is that innovative? I'm not sure, but it's getting the job done.
Yeah. How do we compare to American cities on that score?
American cities tend to have more federal funding and access to federal funds. They can raise bonds. Canadian municipalities can't do that. So they have different financing options than what we do here in Canada.
So are we restricted? Can you talk a bit about the bonds? Are we restricted from, cities restricted from raising money through sale of bonds?
We can't raise bonds.
And that's provincial legislation, or?
I think so, yes, under our local government acts.
Okay. Mr. Oakey, could you talk a little bit about, and you have some anecdotal evidence at the very least, about how the requirement to hire unionized labor has led to inferior.
Mr. Adler, that's 5 minutes. If we could.
Am I done?
Well, we can very briefly, if you can finish, and then Mr. Ogie have a brief response.
Okay. Has led to an inferior product, or?
Sure. I have a long list here, and I don't have time to go through it now, but I'm happy to table it with the committee.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Monsieur Mai, c'est votre tour.
Mr. Mai, over to you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to continue with what my colleague, Mr. Caron, mentioned when he was talking to Mr. Van Eyderson. I would like some clarification. In your brief, you talked about
emission through a cap-and-trade system and a carbon tax. Just so that to clarify, I think some of my colleagues are a bit ill-informed. Can you tell us if there's a difference between a carbon tax and a cap-and-trade system?
Yes, I think obviously there clearly is a difference between a carbon tax and a cap-and-trade system, and a carbon tax puts more of a fee on
everything,
on fuel through the whole system, and the cap-and-trade effectively does the same thing by requiring emitters to buy permits to pollute, and the clean energy companies, and there's a lot of leaders in Alberta that would be able to make a lot of money out of cap-and-trade, would be able to sell their permits and make some money from that. And I think it's a very efficient way to implement a market mechanism to put a price on across the economy.
I guess that's why in 2008 the Conservatives were pushing for a cap-and-trade. So were we. Regarding again in your brief, you mentioned that there is $1.3 billion in terms of subsidies for oil and gas. Can you maybe expand more on that? Because I thought, well, we were saying that it still exists, but the Conservatives are saying no longer exists. Can you tell us what's happening right now?
Well, the government, to its credit, has reduced subsidies in 3 of the last 6 budgets, and we appreciate that, and we're highlighting three mechanisms that I mentioned for this year's budget that we'd like to see, and that would help reduce another $300 or $400 million. The key being the Canadian exploration expense. If you successfully find oil and gas, it no longer really should qualify as an exploration expense. It's just a cost of doing business. And the other two are the accelerated capital cost allowance for the mining sector, and clearly as this government very credibly eliminated or is phasing out the ACCA for the oil sands, it makes equal sense to do so for another type of mining, for the mining sector. And the third piece, the mineral exploration tax credit that we're talking about, it was introduced more than 7 years ago. It's been renewed year by year, but it was brought in as a short-term mechanism to support the mining industry, and evidence has found that its use declines when the mining industry declines, so that benefit doesn't seem to be there.
I'd like to continue more in terms of investing in technology for reducing energy, because I know in my writing in Brossard-Laprairie, I have a company which is Distech Control. They actually invested in a headquarters, and they're doing a great job internationally in terms of promoting the technology for reducing energy. But unfortunately, I don't have much time left. Maybe for the FCM, you're saying in your brief that investing $1 billion in terms of infrastructure can create 10,000 jobs, and obviously it's jobs here in Canada. We've seen with the corporate tax cut that the government has been pushing forward. Now companies are sitting on $500 billion in terms of dead money. Can you tell us why we should invest in infrastructure and why the fact that money is sitting in those private companies is not helping the economy?
Well, the reason to invest in infrastructure is that that's what makes our economy grow. When you can't get goods and services across the city because the roads are congested or the roads are in need of repair, that hurts the economy. When you are in communities that can't rely on their water systems or on their stormwater systems, then that hurts the economy. The fact is to have the economy grow, which in fact creates jobs, means that you have to have a good, solid infrastructure. It's the backbone of what makes this country work, and that's why it's so important.
I don't have a lot of time, but I just want to agree with you, Mr. Bivy. You said that the current policy harms people's ability to recycle and reclassify and become productive members of society. Could you just explain that in a few minutes? Yes, this is a very easy and simple solution to change the loan program in Canada. It wouldn't cost anything, and it would allow people to become more productive more quickly.
And thank you, Mr. Mai. And now we have the lovely Mr. Van Kester.
So nice. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a. Thanks for coming here. This has been a great discussion. Ms. Robinson, we, as a federal government, we spend about $2.5 billion to the provinces and territories for transfers for the labor market agreement. What's your analysis? Is it effective? Have we? How can we measure their success?
Well, that's a huge question, and I know a very topical one, because our colleagues at HRSDC currently are thinking this through in many ways. Where I am best suited to answer is to tell you that as part of the stimulus spending through the LMA, things were done to encourage, for example, pre-apprenticeships programs, getting into secondary school, promoting the awareness of the trades. Problem with all of this is it's chaotically delivered. There isn't a national standard, and there isn't a national outcome. And it's that whole decentralized nature of the spend and the shared jurisdiction issue, again, that came up in my discussion with Mr. Bryson. So I would say, as we look at renewals for the labor market agreements, one of the things is to come to some common data sets as to what is the problem and what is the goal that we all want. For example, there is a lot of concern right now around the issue of, well, we've got to get more young people interested in the trades, and that is valid. But it's equally important to get people in the third and fourth year before they've got their ticket to complete. And there could be targeted uses of the LMAs if we could agree on the problem.
I see what you're saying. It appears to me, though, that there seems to be a problem that stems from the very root. Am I correct? I'm thinking, and I threw this question at, there was another panel here, I think it was last week. We talked about streaming. And the German, of course, the German approach is streaming. They're very successful. There's a cultural difference, though, isn't there, I think, with Canadians. And there seems to be a real aversion to that sort of suggestion that we should, I'm getting a nod from Mr. Bai to Monsieur Bai. Would you comment on that? Is that something we just have to, should there be a discussion, a public discussion in education that would include the feds and an honest discussion about where our education is taking us and whether or not we need to make some real changes? And maybe we just have your...
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I think the issue that comes down, and I talk about this all the time, there are very distinct motivations for the different actors in the education system, and we've actually tried to peanut butter the problem and ascribe to every single actor the same motivation. Universities are motivated by something very different than colleges and different than unions and training, but we all have something to contribute. If we understood a highly differentiated system, which is the German system, I think we'd actually get collaboration and better outcomes. I will tell you on the streaming issue, though, and this is anecdote, but we actually do a kind of streaming in our secondary school systems, whereby, you know, the high school teacher decides, well, you're not so good at math, you do the lower level math, and you're going to go to university. Right? We're making some sort of streaming decisions in grade 10. I know my brother-in-law is a grade 10 math and a grade 12 math and science teacher. Who's making those decisions? And why haven't we then said to that student who's going to the lesser math, hey, did you know you could do X, Y, Z that is also productive? Mm-hmm. So when you get into the data that 69% of the parents want their kids to go to university and only 15% of the parents want their kids to go to college, and yet we don't have the labor market information in the hands of the parents and the high school counselors, that is the kind of national discussion we need. These are long-term bias.
We got time for Mr. Bai yet, Mr. Chair?
Just a few seconds, and I think you raise an interesting question. The problem I think that we have is that with education having many players, including the provincial government, it's going to be really hard to change everything. However, the government has the ability and the capacity to direct funding where education is needed and jobs are existing and cannot find workers. And in Alberta, we have employers that cannot find workers. In Nova Scotia, you have companies that now with the huge shipbuilding that is happening, they're scrambling to find education. But we're going to, for our funding, the Canada Student Loan Program and the Canada Student Grant Program, we're going to keep giving money to people that are making their choice and going to universities and get a degree and a diploma where no jobs are there. And you've got that in articles from the media and journalists that are saying, why are we funding professions where there is no jobs?
Thank you very much, Mr. Bai. Mr. Brahmi?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, I did want to put a question to the two witnesses who talked to us about the importance of education and how disconnected skills are, or rather what the disconnect is between people with certain skills and the skills that are needed by certain businesses that cannot develop because they don't have enough qualified people. My first question goes to Ms. Robinson. You talked about the fact that there are two aspects that the government needs to act upon. And I'm talking about the budgetary framework because we're in the Finance Committee and we need to focus on this. So first of all, the scholarships or bursaries. And you also talked about tax credits for businesses that are ready or that are prepared to help these students who are in this training stream so that they can improve this sector of the labor market. So could you expand on that, please?
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for your question. I didn't get into too much discussion in my statement today about the scholarship issue, but it is in our submission, and this is the case. Currently, the federal government has supports for undergraduates, but when you get into the fine print, it's for university undergraduates. So there is an industrial undergraduate student research award program at the Natural Sciences Engineering Research Council. And college undergraduates of 4-year college degrees are to date not yet able to apply for that, and yet we are the ones working on applied R&D for companies. So for me, the scholarships for undergraduates is an equity. It's a treat undergraduates equally. A college undergraduate from a publicly approved 4-year degree is as important and as relevant as a university undergraduate. Similarly, if the government considers funding a new undergraduate scholarship program for international undergraduates, my concern is that it be open to undergraduate programs in colleges and polytechnics as well. So it's a question of equity on that one. On your second one, I think we need to narrow it down. The issue here is for the world of apprentices. So this is the world of the various Red Seal trades. We have said that the country created a employer job creation tax credit of $2,000. That's getting the apprentice in the door. We believe that if the issue is how do you get the apprentice to complete, we should probably incentivize employers to get that apprentice to complete their certification under their watch and offer a tax credit for an employer who sees that apprentice through to certification. Does that make sense?
Monsieur Buy, est-ce que vous voulez apporter votre contribution?
Mr. Buy, would you like to add to that? Yes, absolutely. Very rapidly, because I don't want to take up the committee's time, but this is very important. We have people who are seeking work. They're trying to improve their skills, and there are employers who are desperately looking for employees. And there's a certain amount of snobbishness because we're talking about a certain number of weeks for certain programs in university, and that's fine. We should continue to support those programs. But when you're training an engineer, for example, to work on oil platforms, and there's no one to install the pipes, there is no one to do the plumbing, there is no one to look after the electricity, well, that engineer won't be able to work. So in Alberta, there are sectors in Alberta, in Ontario, in Quebec, in the West. There are people with skills that can be applied rapidly, and they can be certified by polytechnics and by colleges. They can be, those programs can be delivered rapidly, and they should be recognized, and this would be very easy because, and this is not in the budget, and this would cost nothing for the Canadian government. So they should just put in place these programs that are not as long in terms of number of weeks. Last question. Ms. Robinson, you also mentioned.
Now for Mr. Jane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses that attended here today. I'm interested in the Red Seal program and, of course, the situation regarding getting people from one part of the country to another. First of all, Red Seal, as I believe, it gives taxpayers the best return on investment if they see those people through, and I was very interested to hear about the tax credit for employers. I think that's a great idea. How would you see that working exactly, if you could give me 20 or 30 seconds of information?
So what we're trying to actually deal with this issue around poaching, which we haven't talked about either.
I understand.
So where a employer, a company, has a tradesperson who's a third-level apprentice in that Red Seal trade, needs to go back to that block release training and education, but doesn't want to let that person go because, you know, it's just business is tight, you've got to keep working, and for the student there is no incentive to give up the job to go back for training. If that employer knew that you get him through to the next level, you'll get another tax credit, then we think that might deal with some of that completion problem. It's not a solution for all things, But I think part of our problems in general in Canada with post-secondary education is we think one size fits all. This apprenticeship issue with 300,000 apprentices currently enrolled, there are different solutions for the different problems we're finding. One kind of solution for a young apprentice, but the average apprentice is 25 years old. And, you know, the older apprentices carrying all sorts of debt may not be able to go back to complete. So let's get the employer to take an ownership of that problem too.
Great idea. Mr. Bai, you also mentioned tax credits and some formation relating to having people complete. You talked specifically about the grant program, of course, and making them eligible for that. I do understand the Canada Grants program, though, is for the lower to middle income earners, so it's not specifically for return on investment to taxpayers, I guess. Would you see it better to expand the loan program than to try to expand the grant program? I mean, in particular, because it's not made for that type of career path.
The loan program is there. You know, if you are going to look at the loan program, I think the expansion should be in the amounts that are given. You know, it is my belief that at this point the federal government has not increased that for a number of years, and all the costs are rising everywhere throughout this country. Tuition costs are rising, and students are finding themselves in a difficult place. So I think if you're looking at the loan program, I think you're looking at this, and you should be looking at increasing the amounts potentially given. If you're looking at the grant, I think the simple solution is the less than 60 weeks change.
The FCM, of course, is very interesting. You appreciated the Economic Action Plan. You've come out with rave reviews with this government from 2006 when you first, I think, well, you talked about it quite a bit, the $123 billion deficit, infrastructure deficit that was across the country. Now, we haven't solved that infrastructure deficit, but how would you describe in 2 sentences the government's performance from 2006 to today in relation to our, first of all, our cooperation with provinces and territories and municipalities, the things like making the gas tax permanent for municipalities, and just the rollout, the one-page application form for infrastructure projects, the general overall of the program? How would you describe it in two or three sentences?
2 or 3 sentences. We've appreciated the partnership, and we look forward to continuing it.
And the success of the program?
The programs have been successful in meeting some of the infrastructure needs across this country, but we need to do more.
Exactly. And indeed, if you'd comment further, if the government does come forward after negotiations and consultations, which of course we're doing now, with another program that's similar in nature, or a suite of programs that are similar in nature as the Economic Action Plan, as the infrastructure stimulus programs, etc., how would you feel about that? How would your organization feel about that?
Well, obviously what we're looking at is continuing the dialogue and the partnership, and looking at meeting the needs of Canadian municipalities across the country. So.
And do you think at that stage, when we come out with that program and you applaud it, hopefully, that all levels of government, including all parties in this place, should come and support that program as well and actually vote for it?
We're very hopeful that that will occur, and in fact it has to occur. And
it must have been disappointing seeing the last votes on the Economic Action Plan and the NDP's position on that, voting against it every time. That must have been very disappointing for your organization.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And you're nodding, you're in agreement. Thank you very much.
I wouldn't want you to interpret anything into that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jean. Could we ask the analysts, could they let us know at some point, no rush, who brought in that gas tax idea? I'm just curious. Now, Ms. Glover, we'd like to hear from Ms. Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start, first of all, with the Green Budget Coalition. And I appreciate everything you've said to date about the differences we've made in 3 subsequent budgets with regards to oil and gas. And I just want to point out very quickly that this government has never introduced any kind of tax incentive favoring the oil and gas sector. That's correct, is it not, sir?
I'm not expert enough to comment on that.
Well, I can assure you it wasn't this government. But this government has, in fact, as you've said, in 3 budgets now, tried to balance the playing field, or level the playing field. Income Tax Act right now does not include any tax preference for oil sand producers. We have, as you said, phased out in the latest budget the Atlantic Investment Tax Credit. We've also phased out the corporate mineral exploration and development tax credit that you were speaking about. And of course, we did also put through an accelerated capital cost allowance for clean energy. So I just want to make sure that Canadians who might be listening do know what you were talking about when you were, commending us about 3 of the budgets that we've used to actually level the playing field. But I do want to ask you about other countries, because as we know, we're trying to meet, and now we are meeting the G20 commitment that we made. And I just wonder if you know how other countries like the United States are doing in meeting that commitment compared to Canada.
I'm honestly not expert on other countries on subsidies. I did want to clarify something. In the latest budget, your government phased out the corporate mineral exploration tax credit. However, there is a mineral exploration tax credit which remains in place, which we are encouraging your government to phase out, well, not renew.
Okay. All right, I'll look into
These
that.
are
I know
two
the
separate-
I know
they're
the
two separate
ACCA
pieces.
that you were talking about is still there, but nevertheless, Merritt, I want you to have an opportunity to dispute what Mr. Marsden said about union workers being more highly skilled, and perhaps your companies aren't because you don't have the red seal. I don't know if you have the red seal trade thing, but that was what I understood, and I just want to give you an opportunity to clarify, because I don't want to, if I misunderstood, then I apologize, but that seemed to be what was being said.
I just want to be clear. I didn't interpret the comments that way, but I will just speak to our member companies, and they spend millions of dollars of apprenticeship training, scholarship refunds. Also, in most provinces, apprenticeship is public. The one problem, though, that I will highlight around apprentices is the ratio. We've been calling, and our provincial associations have been calling for a 1-to-1 ratio between apprenticeship and journeyman. There are members just in the Ottawa area that tomorrow would hire probably 5 or 10 more electricians, but they can't because the provincial government says that you need to have 3 journeymen for 1 apprentice. And this is a position that's been supported by the Building Trades Union. I don't know why they support keeping young people out of the industry when we have such a shortage of workers. But if we could get rid of that ratio, and I know that's not a federal area, but if we could get the provinces just to simply have a 1-to-1 ratio, that would fix a lot of our problems.
Well, that's interesting. And back to the questions that Mr. Hoback was asking, then I don't understand why the municipalities insist on having these rules in place to favor union members and unions being invited in. And I learn a lot from Mr. Marsden when he talks. He's well educated on all of this. And so, I didn't mean to suggest he had said something inappropriate. That's just how I understood it. But I'm trying to understand why municipalities are hesitant at saying we should have an open competition.
Yeah, I don't think they are. I think they're bound by decades-old certifications that may or may not still be relevant. If there was an easy decertification process, perhaps they wouldn't still be bound by those processes.
So far in committee, I have heard from no witness that has convinced me that there is a positive plus reason to limiting open contracts.
Because
I
there
don't
isn't.
get it. Well, and unless another witness comes forward to suggest otherwise, I think this ought to be a recommendation, because so far no one has told me why it's better to do it the other way. Career colleges, may I ask you, Monsieur B, for a list of those programs that are the 26 weeks or under 60 that would actually address the skill shortages, because I'm open to considering your proposal. However, I need to be convinced that they will actually address the skill shortages. So if you could provide a list of those programs, that would be, evidence that might, sway us one way or another. But what I'm at a loss for is when you compare Canada Student Loans to Canada Student Grants, because a loan is repaid, right? And a grant is not. So have you costed out how much it would cost for the government in revenues for that?
Thank you, Ms. Glover. Thank you, Ms. Glover. We're of
Can you just answer?
Well, we've actually we've gone beyond the time, but we'll have some opportunity to discuss the recommendations later.
You can submit it in writing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Glover. And time marches on, and we appreciate each of your interventions today, and it will help us as we draw together recommendations for the upcoming budget as part of these pre-budget consultations. So thank you very much. We're going to have a 2-minute break as we'll do five-minute break. We'll do a 5-minute break for the new witnesses and the members to reconvene. Mr. Turk. How are you? Welcome. I call the meeting back to order, and welcome to our witnesses, and welcome back to our members. We're going to resume the 84th meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance, and welcome back, Mr. Turk. It would have been tragic if the representative of the Association of University Teachers was late for class here. Just in time. So, exactly. As you are always punctual. And we're looking forward to hearing from each of you. We have today Association of Universities and Colleges Canada, Paul Davidson with us, and we have Mr. Turk, of course, from the Canadian Association of University Teachers, Canadian Cooperative Association, Sean Murphy. Welcome, Sean. And we have Jay Myers from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters back with us, and Terry Odla from the Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami. And welcome to you today. We're going to start with your testimony, starting with Mr. Davidson. We have 5 minutes each. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Bonsoir tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'être parmi vous.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to congratulate the committee for the advice provided to the government on the budget.
Came to Parliament Hill to show how universities are putting ideas to work for Canadians. I'm pleased to say there was widespread recognition of the role universities are playing in communities across Canada in conducting leading research, fostering innovation, and ensuring Canada has the talent we need to succeed in the global knowledge economy. Our members were joined by university champions from the private sector, from student entrepreneurs building born global companies to CEOs who have invested in higher education for their workforce to up their company's game in a competitive world. Universities are centers of ideas and innovation, and whereas a 20th century Canada could prosper from its natural bounty, today's global knowledge economy demands that we must compete on our brains. Canada's students and their families know this and are making smart choices. Over 1 million students are pursuing an undergraduate education in 2012. Le budget 2013 offre au gouvernement fédéral l'occasion de réaliser des investissements.
The budget 2013 offered the federal government the opportunity to make strategic investments and allow universities to continue to increase Canadians' economic prosperity within a global knowledge and innovation economy. Our association specifically recommends that the federal government invest in university research, in international education, and in renewing post-secondary education for Aboriginals in its 2013 budget.
Agencies and the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, including the institutional cost of research, because quite simply, these are foundational to everything that universities can do. We also recommend more graduate student internships and employment experience in a broad range of interdisciplinary sectors. This would enable more companies to take advantage of the highly talented graduates Canada's universities produce. As you've heard from several witnesses, the recent Council of Canadian Academies report highlights the outstanding quality of Canada's university researchers and points to Canada's growing influence on global knowledge. Additional investments are required to sustain and accelerate the pace of research. Canada also needs a strong national and coordinated approach to international education, one that involves governments working in concert with the education sector. International education should be a pillar of the Government of Canada's foreign policy and economic growth objectives. Over the course of the summer, you may have seen a recent report from DFATE that indicated that international students contribute close to $8 billion a year to Canada's economy. And when I say that, I'm thinking of communities like Nanaimo, Kamloops, Brandon, Sudbury, Chicoutimi, and Moncton, who all benefit from international students. The international students actually contribute more to Canada's economy through export than the export of softwood, the export of wheat, and the export of aluminum. So to think of this sector as one that is a lever for Canada is important, especially in new and emerging markets. Attracting international students to Canada gives us an edge in global commerce and trade. But it's about far much more than attracting international students to Canada. We must also ensure that this generation of young Canadians gains study abroad experience to prepare them to meet the needs of the global economy.
We think of ourselves as an open global nation, but American students are twice as likely to study abroad as Canadians, and German students are 3 times as likely to study abroad. We've got lots of work to do. We also need to position Canada as an international leader in higher education, not only as a recruiter, but as a partner in education and research. And international research collaboration amongst universities, governments, and industry builds the strong people-to-people ties needed to attract the best and brightest talent and to expand our trade and investment ties around the world. To support international higher education, Canada should implement the recommendations of the CHACMA report. In brief, funding international research collaboration at scale, investing in initiatives to support study abroad opportunities for Canadian students to gain global skills, and investing in initiatives to enhance marketing and branding efforts to attract international students to Canada and leverage existing investments. Our final recommendation is to invest in post-secondary education of Aboriginal people. And if I can for a moment, let me be blunt. I've come before this committee 4 years in a row now, saying that this is an urgent national priority. We welcome and support the government's efforts and the First Nations and the Crown First Nations gathering and the particular focus on the K-12 system. But we have to do more. Canada needs to go further, and we need to go faster. Universities have also made strides in attracting and retaining Aboriginal students over those 4 years. We have proven projects that can be scaled up to increase Aboriginal participation in graduation rates. Action and investment are needed now. AUCC recommends advancing Aboriginal post-secondary education measures that can be delivered by a third party with a proven track record in Aboriginal matters in conjunction with private sector partners. The partnership of Aboriginal leadership, universities, and the private sector will help close the higher education gap between Aboriginals and others in Canada. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Canada will benefit from these investments.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson, and welcome back, Mr. Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's nothing like having 5 minutes to concentrate the mind. I'd begin by observing what I'm sure everyone in this room agrees with, and that is the importance of post-secondary education and training, not only for the future of our economy, but the future of our society. We're not only training people who are going to be making economic contributions, but educating people who are going to be family members, community members, and citizens. Also, something everyone would agree with, I assume, is the vital role the federal government plays in post-secondary education and training, both in its transfers to the provinces for post-secondary education and training and in funding research. We congratulate the government on sticking to its commitment of having a 3% escalator in its transfer for post-secondary education on a continuing basis. But we would note that with the rising costs, that is with inflation and with the increasing enrollment, that 3% escalator is not keeping up with the costs that provinces and universities and colleges are facing. With respect to the spending on research, and this is where I'd like to focus my remarks, again, the government deserves credit because it has been spending more on research than its predecessor. But we would suggest that it's been investing that money badly. I don't know who the government's advisors are and how it should be spending research money, but I'd strongly urge you to get new advisors. It's time to get a new crew giving you advice. Let me give you a few examples. The government allocated close to $200 million for 19 Canada Excellence Research Chairs, who get $10 million each over a period of time, as well as more money being provided by their own institutions. And there are another 10 in the works. Now, this is a huge amount of money concentrated in a very small number of people. We'd suggest this is not the way you best advance science. It's the same mentality of some sports teams that think that by spending the bulk of their cap on a few high-priced stars, they build a sports franchise. That doesn't work. So, for example, instead of $10 million per, some very vital research centers have had to close. For example, the Polar Atmospheric Research Laboratory, which is closing because it can't get $1.5 million a year. That money supported the work of 60 scientists doing a vast range of high Arctic research. Given how expensive it is to do research in the high Arctic, it does cost money. What's being lost is not only the work of those 60 scientists, but also the $8 million or so in equipment that the government has financed for that center. Or the experimental lakes area, the best in the world in freshwater study, It's been compared to closing the world's most powerful astronomy telescope or closing Los Alamos. The cost is $2 million a year. Or the Kluane Lake Research Station, a legendary research center, more than 50 years old, uniquely positioned to study the largest non-polar ice field in the world and the effects thereon on global warming. $1 million a year, and yet we have $10 million per person for each of the Canada Excellence Research Chairs. The Minister of Industry, and hopefully you've seen it, I can make it available to the committee, a letter signed by more than 48 of the top scientists in the country, deploring the kinds of cuts that NSERC had to make that resulted in these closures. And the NSERC website is very clear that it's having to make these closures because of the government's cut to its funding. A second area is in terms of the funding of the three granting councils, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, NSERC, and CIHR. Over the last 6 years, since this government has come to power, in terms of real dollars, that is after inflation, the funding for all three granting councils has fallen. SSHRC by 12.9%, NSERC by 3.1%, CIHR by 6%, and indirect costs have fallen by 2.5%. In terms of who gets funded with granting council money, if you look at NSERC, where we look at the balance between targeted research, that is research directed by third parties, and basic research, the amount in real dollars that's is being spent on basic research has fallen by about $80 million since 2006-07, while that being spent on targeted research has increased by equivalent amount. We also see the destruction of our knowledge base, the dismembering of Library and Archives Canada, the serious cuts to Statistics Canada that are crippling a lot of social science research, and the cuts to Parks Canada that looks after 167 historic sites, as well as countless archaeological artifacts. In short, you're spending a lot of money. You could spend it better. We encourage you to put an additional $500 million for the three funding agencies, have the funding agencies be more arm's length, introduce the Canada Post-Secondary Education Act as we recommended in our submission to you, and we join with AUCC in encouraging much more substantial funding for Aboriginal education. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turk. Now we'll hear from Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish to begin by thanking you and the committee members for inviting the Canadian Cooperative Association to appear before the Finance Committee as you undertake your pre-budget consultations. Comme vous le savez sans doute, le secteur coopératif canadien.
During that time, the cooperative sector in Canada has received a lot of attention over the past months. In May, the House of Commons debated a motion to establish a special committee to look into the co-op sector. To our surprise, the committee was formed in June, and they held numerous hearings over the summer. In September, the special committee tabled their report in the House. Both the report and the recommendations from the special committee have been very well received by the cooperative sector, and we see this as an opportunity to develop and grow our partnership with the federal government. The special committee report made 8 recommendations. However, CCA believes that there are 3 that stand out.
Study the possibility of consolidating the responsibilities for cooperatives under a suitable department, such as Industry Canada. We are not looking for another study, but rather we would like to see co-ops housed in Industry Canada. Currently, co-ops are housed under Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, not a natural fit. So why should we go to Industry Canada? Cooperatives are businesses, businesses in your riding. They employ Canadians, they pay taxes, and they create jobs. Cooperatives can be found everywhere, including your riding, in small villages and big cities, in every region of Canada. They exist in virtually every sector of the economy, from retail and financial services to agriculture, housing, and healthcare. Cooperatives are more durable than other types of businesses. Research has shown that new co-ops are more likely to remain in business than other new enterprises and are more resilient in economic downturns. And finally, cooperatives are rooted in their communities and in your ridings. The jobs and wealth they create remain in the communities in which they are located. These are a few reasons why we believe the co-op sector can help Industry Canada deliver on its efforts to create jobs, stimulate growth, and invest in the future. The Special Committee on Cooperatives also recommended that the government explore the feasibility and cost of allowing Canadians flexibility to invest RRSP funds in cooperatives. The current RRSP rules do not encourage investment in the cooperative sector. The so-called 10% rule prevents members of certain cooperatives from using their RRSPs as investment vehicles to recapitalize their co-ops. Therefore, in the spirit of the committee's recommendations on RRSP contributions, I would suggest that you revoke the RRSP measures enacted in the 2011 federal budget. La troisième recommandation a trait à la capitalisation.
The third recommendation revolves around capitalization of cooperatives. Co-ops are businesses. However, because of their unique business model, co-ops often find it difficult to raise capital. Aware of this, the Special Committee recognized it and suggested that potential solutions could be found. One solution could be a national investment fund. The fund would be a national pool of financing available to support the growth and development of existing and new individual cooperatives.
Investment fund. This would be a great opportunity for a partnership between co-ops and the federal government. Finally, if you remember nothing else from my submission, I want you to remember our 3 recommendations that would create jobs, stimulate growth, and invest in the future. First, the co-op sector belongs within Industry Canada. Second, we suggest that you revoke the RRSP measures enacted in the 2011 federal budget. And third, the development of a national investment fund. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Now, Mr. Myers.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to be here today to make a few comments as to the economic recovery in Canada.
Recovering from the impacts of the steepest collapse in global asset markets experienced since the Great Depression. Canada's manufacturers and exporters were particularly hard hit. But since 2009, Canada's manufacturing and exporting sectors have been on the rebound. Government tax policies have played an important role in supporting Canada's economic recovery because the profitability of Canadian business determines the employment prospects of Canadians. Every 1 percentage point increase in after-tax profits as a percent of GDP leads to a 0.8 percentage point decline in Canada's unemployment rate. Corporate tax rate reductions have made businesses more profitable, and that's a good thing. If tax rates had not been reduced, Canada's unemployment rate today would be higher than that of the United States, and about 200,000 fewer Canadians would be employed. Now, with consumers and governments needing to borrow less and growth in international markets slowing down, business investment has become the critical factor in sustaining and strengthening economic growth in Canada. When companies invest in productive assets, in new value-adding production technologies, in new product development and workforce training, they boost their productivity and become more competitive in domestic and export markets. They grow their businesses and employ more Canadians in high-paying jobs. Fiscal policy is a decisive factor in influencing business investment decisions and our economic future. Deficit reduction and responsible financial management are essential to maintaining investor confidence. Our lower business taxes have made Canada a more competitive location for investment. But countries around the world, most notably the United States, are taking aggressive steps that will further reduce effective tax rates on business investment. We need to stay in the game, and in order to do that, Canada's fiscal policy must ensure that our tax treatment of business investment remains internationally competitive. We must encourage businesses in Canada to invest more in new and improved products, processes, technologies, and skills training, and we need to reward the companies that are taking the risks to make these investments. Business investment is highly dependent on operating cash flow performance. Since the recession, all businesses, and manufacturers in particular, have had to rely more heavily on cash flow in order to finance investments in new facilities and in machinery and equipment. While the cash balances of manufacturers and many other businesses have increased, so too have their investments in value-adding capital assets. Cash is not dead money. It is what businesses use to pay off short-term liabilities and invest in or finance their investments in new facilities, machinery, and equipment. The accelerated capital cost allowance for investments in manufacturing and processing machinery and equipment that was introduced in 2007 has been instrumental in assisting Canadian manufacturers make investments in the new technologies they've needed to survive the recession and to grow. The ACCA encourages investment and capital turnover by raising the after-tax rate of return on eligible investments by 10.4% during the first 3 years of use. Since 2007, the ACCA has contributed about $2 billion in additional cash flow to manufacturers and has generated an estimated total of $3.1 billion in additional investment. The annual level of manufacturing investment in machinery and equipment has increased by $5 billion since 2010. It's important to note that other countries, most notably again the United States, have also implemented rapid write-offs for their manufacturing sectors. Short of providing an investment tax credit, accelerated depreciation is the most important tax measure the government has to encourage direct investment in new technologies. CME recommends that the ACCA for manufacturing and processing machinery and equipment now be made a permanent part of Canada's tax system. Our recommendation is supported by 50 other industry associations that are members of the Canadian Manufacturing Coalition, as well as by other business groups and by labour leaders. We also need to take steps to strengthen business investment and innovation. Recently, the government introduced legislation that will change Canada's scientific research and experimental development SR&ED tax credit system. It will, among other things, reduce the tax credit rate from 20% to 15% and eliminate eligibility for capital expenditures. These changes will significantly increase the taxes paid by Canada's top R&D performers, and especially for more capital-intensive manufacturers. And I think it will erode the international competitiveness of Canada's tax system for business investment. For companies using SR&ED, the cost of investing in R&D will increase by 5.9%, dropping Canada from 13th to 17th position among 30 OECD nations in terms of international tax competitiveness for R&D investments. We're working closely with finance officials to develop alternative mechanisms that will encourage businesses to invest in research, development, and commercialization, and to do that in Canada. To that end, we recommend that CRA simplify the SR&ED tax credit program. An accelerated write-off should be provided for investments in capital equipment used in R&D. The SR&ED tax credit should be made partially refundable. Direct funding be made available for supporting strategic manufacturing and technology investments, and a voucher program should be established to allow businesses to direct
Myers.
Funding to college, university, and R&D support services that best meet their needs.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thanks.
Myers. Mr. Odla.
Unukut. Thank you very much for the invitation to appear today. I will take a few moments to summarize the major themes of our written submission, and then I would be more than happy to take your questions. As many of you know, Inuit Nunangat, the Inuit homeland in Canada, makes up approximately 1/3 of Canada's landmass and half its shoreline. This area, governed by a set of 5 constitutionally protected modern treaties, contains much of Canada's non-renewable and other natural resource potential. The Government of Canada is relying heavily on resource development projects to propel economic growth in Canada, including increased wealth, expansion of employment, and improved levels of productivity. In the Arctic, such projects must strike an appropriate balance between economic development, social development, cultural continuity, and environmental protection, and they must actively engage Inuit. This is starting to happen, particularly in Nunavut, where I'm from, but the federal government has the power to enhance the extent to which Inuit contribute to Canada's economic performance. The key is education and training. Parliament and the federal government have the authority and capacity to take far-reaching and imaginative measures to bring about greatly improved Inuit education and training outcomes. This authority and capacity is drawn from a variety of constitutionally anchored sources, including Parliament's powers to make laws in relation to Inuit under heading 91.24 of the Constitution Act, 1867. Special federal powers in the territories and over such things as marine areas, fisheries, and cross-boundary matters, and Parliament's unqualified spending powers. A radical improvement in Inuit education and training will not be achieved without the use of targeted federal funding. The scope of what is needed is large. In 2006, a federally appointed conciliator reported during the process of updating the implementation of the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement that even a 5-year effort aimed at making modest headway in Inuit participation in the Nunavut workforce would require $100 million in federal funds. That projected undertaking was just in relation to Nunavut. Other Inuit regions of Canada have similar needs, and existing funding is simply not enough to meet those needs. The Inuit population in Canada is much younger than the general Canadian population, with fertility rates While fertility rates are gradually declining, the number of Inuit in the prime employment cohort, aged 20 to 60, will show steady growth in coming decades. This presents both a challenge and an opportunity. It is a challenge in that public sector policies and private sector initiatives will need to be fashioned so as to generate adequate employment and other economic opportunities for Inuit, particularly young Inuit joining the workforce for the first time. It is an opportunity in that successfully attracting and sustaining optimal Inuit participation in employment and other economic opportunities can contribute in tangible and important ways to both Inuit economic self-reliance and Canada's overall economic performance. There is one other aspect of Arctic demographics that needs emphasis. This aspect is effectively summarized in the text of the Circumpolar Inuit Declaration on Resource Development Principles in Inuit Nunat, released in May 2011, which says, Inuit are committed to safeguarding Inuit culture against excess adverse pressures and impacts that could be brought on by an overly ambitious, ill-timed, or poorly planned and implemented staging of resource development projects, particularly insofar as such a scenario precipitated a major influx of non-Inuit while failing to impart the technology, skills, and training and business opportunities made by Inuit. As I said earlier, Inuit are among Canada's youngest citizens, with a median age of 22, nearly half the Canadian median age of 40. The bulk of this population is now moving through the education system, yet too few are graduating. The stark reality of Inuit education today is that roughly 3/4 of children are not completing high school, and many that do find their skills don't compare to those of non-Aboriginal graduates. Low educational outcomes are associated with adverse social implications, including greater unemployment, greater numbers of youth entering the criminal justice system, and greater incidences of illness and poverty. Existing socioeconomic conditions will worsen unless more Inuit children graduate from high school with equivalent skills and the same opportunities to succeed in post-secondary education as their non-Inuit peers. There is a long, graphic, and unhappy list of economic and social development indicators revealing the pronounced and enduring gaps in basic well-being between Inuit and other Aboriginal peoples on the one hand, and the general Canadian population on the other. To conclude, the growing national interest in the rights, interests, and conditions of Indigenous peoples should give Parliament and the Government of Canada added incentive to underscore improved economic circumstances for Inuit and other Aboriginal peoples, a core reference point in determining and measuring the economic circumstances of Canada. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Odla. And now going to members' questions. We're going to begin with Mr. Marsden.
Well, thank you. I was just wondering, Mr. Turk, if we should tell people how long we've known each other. Is that 30 or 40 years?
On the lower end of that, I hope.
I noted from your answers to the written questions under other challenges, you wrote about youth unemployment, and that's something that has rippled through almost all the presentations we've had here, you know, one form or another. I mean, the last presentation was great, speaking very directly to the youth of the North. Committee members will tell you that I go on and on about the $128 billion of a deficit in infrastructure that we have, and how we believe that there's a place for the federal government to take a leadership role in that. And I talk, coming from a labor background, about craftspeople, and if they're working on these jobs and they have apprentices with them, they can give them on-the-job skills training that you can't get elsewhere. Now, countries like Germany, and we've had previous speaker, Mrs. Robinson, talking about it, shows, or at least I believe, a right mix of public investment with market solutions in a green economy. And I'm looking to you to, you know, what measures do you feel the federal government should take to move Canada more in that direction of that greening of our economy?
You began with observing the need for training of our young people to deal with that issue. The federal government has a very important role. Part of it, as was several of us have mentioned, and that is better education and training funding for Aboriginal students in this country. In the prairies, they're the largest demographic. English is the second language training. The federal government has been moving more toward a voucher-type system, which has privileged the private for-profit trainers, who often have less qualified teachers, high turnover rate amongst their teachers, uneven programs, at the expense of public colleges that have built up a wealth of experience and credibility and high-quality educators over a period of time. These are public dollars that the federal government is investing, and we think that one of the ways you can get more bang for your buck is to see that they go to public institutions. You also made reference to apprenticeship. There have been measures taken to assist those in the Red Seal trades. The apprenticeship incentive grant that gives $1,000 each year for the first 2 years. On completion of the year, a completion grant for when they complete their apprenticeship training. More needs to be done in that regard. There are a number of important trades in Canada that are not under the Red Seal that need to be recognized, whether it be X-ray technicians or whatever. And I think the federal government also has to, in addition to reaching beyond the non-Red Seal trades, provide more of an inducement for employers to take on apprentices. We've lagged as a country in apprenticeship for as long as you and I have known each other. And one of the reasons for it was always cheaper for industry to bring in a skilled tradesperson as an immigrant than to train a young person. And I think there has to be more incentives for business to take on apprentices so that we grow our own and provide opportunities to our own young people to acquire these trades.
Thank you. Mr. Davidson, we've heard as well concerns about low productivity in Canada. And in your presentation, you were talking about the lack of R&D investment in Canada. And would you say that that has had a negative impact on our productivity?
Certainly one of the things AUCC has worked quite closely with has been contributing to the Jenkins report last year and the recommendations of the Jenkins report, which really focused on how do we increase private sector investment in R&D. The record shows that government investment in research has actually been quite sustained and quite large, but it's really attracting additional research investment from the private sector that's most important in terms of getting Canada up to international levels. And in that connection, the recommendation of the Jenkins report provides some path forward. In the discussions we have this afternoon, there's some debate as to which are the most effective.
Mr. Audley, I appreciate your presentation. It was very clear and very concise about the needs of your community. We've had speakers, again, just here today, talking about the fact that across our country, we have got a built-in pool of people who need jobs from their First Nations community and from Inuit communities. The loaded question would be, how receptive on the ground? I mean, you have to go out and you have to access these dollars, for sure. And there's a responsibility on all of us to provide. Sure. But on the ground, what reaction, what buy-in do you think you have?
When it comes to education and employment opportunities.
Yeah, you talked about the dropout rate.
Mr. Marsden, that's it for your time. Mr. Marsden, very briefly, Mr. Odla.
Okay, well, there is buy-in, and we have submitted a report on the First Canadians First National Strategy on Inuit education. And based on the number of projects that are happening up north, there is buy-in among the locals to try and get themselves positioned to take on the jobs that are being made available.
Thank you, Mr. Marsden. Thank you, Mr. Odla. Now we'll hear from Ms. MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I first would like to start, Mr. Davidson, you made a brief comment about internships. Could you tell me what you were thinking in your opening comments there?
Sure. Yes, thank you. Our recommendation is in recommending increases in research spending and innovation spending, that there be more opportunities for university students, both undergraduate and graduate, to work in the private sector as part of their program. There are programs like the MyTax initiative, which have been very effective at linking small and medium enterprises with graduate students doing real work in real time that's creating value in the local economy and providing the students important research opportunities.
Okay, so I'll just use my daughter as an example. She did a co-op program through university, and it linked her for a number of different terms, but the federal government played no role there, and it seemed to be very effective. So are you saying that we should be jumping in and interjecting into something that seems to be working pretty well between universities and the private sector?
It's one of the important recommendations of the Jenkins report, looking at finding ways of actually engaging the private sector more thoroughly and earlier on in issues of research, development, and innovation. It's interesting, in the American experience, there's far greater flow between graduate students and the private sector, so that the private sector actually understands and values those graduates even more highly, so that we don't actually lose graduate students to other jurisdictions. If I could, just on the question of internships, though, one of the things I'm really pleased about and proud about is that over half of all Canadian university students now have a co-op, service learning, or internship experience as part of their undergraduate program. It was not that long ago when it was the preserve of one or two institutions, but now it is an integral part of many students' undergraduate formation.
Okay. So my next, and perhaps both Mr. Myers and yourself, it sounds like you would be in a debate in terms of the changes made to the SHRED credit, because obviously those were recommendations out of the Jenkins, and it sounds, so give me, if you could both give me a sentence or two in terms of supporting the changes versus concerns about the changes.
If you'd like me to jump in, in the consultation process, we recommended actually that there be a shift from tax measures to direct spending measures to targeted initiatives that would enhance these sort of outcomes. We were pleased to see the recommendations in Jenkins. We recognize it's a difficult terrain for the government to make choices, but we would support the recommendations of Jenkins in that regard.
Ms. Myers.
We also support a number of recommendations in the Jenkins report. I guess our concern is, though, the dilution of the SHRED tax credit system and the impact that has on our top R&D performers in the country that are looking not necessarily, whether or not they're going to do R&D, but whether or not they're going to do R&D in Canada, because we're competing for every cent of investment. We would have liked to have seen the Jenkins panel look at other direct funding mechanisms that and look at ways of how we can work more closely in collaborative research with the universities and colleges. I think there's a very large pool of government money that is going into supporting academic research that could also be used to leverage business collaborative research and development.
And maybe I'll stick with you, Mr. Myers. Certainly a number of manufacturers have had challenges in the last number of years, and certainly we're hearing from the opposition in terms of wanting to raise the taxes, that some industries are diseases and others are better. Can you first of all talk about why tax rates and competitive tax rates are important for your businesses? And what would happen if we did raise the taxes?
Well, today, especially for manufacturers and exporters, the two sectors that were hardest hit by the recession, it's become very difficult to raise financing. Working capital is really at a premium, so it's cash flow that drives investment activity, whether that's in training or in R&D or in new technology. And so I see the tax measures that the government has taken simply providing more money or leaving more money in the hands of the businesses that are making these investments, and I think that's been extremely important.
Okay. And I think your comment, cash is not dead money, so maybe talk a little bit further in terms of that particular concept and thought.
Well, there have been some people who say that the cash balances that are growing on the part of businesses and manufacturers as well, they're better uses than holding cash. And some people have referred to this as dead money. I don't see that at all. What companies are doing is borrowing more. They have more short-term liabilities that they need cash to be able to pay out.
McLeod and Mr. Myers, that's it for that, Ms. McLeod. But luckily, well, just out of respect for Ms. McLeod, I'll consider continuing with the same line of questioning, which I have this round now. So, Mr. Myers, we've had both the Governor of the Bank of Canada and Minister Flaherty speak of this dead money that you're not investing, that despite lower corporate taxes, despite ample incentives for investment, including accelerated capital cost allowance and the SHRED program, we've had, again, the Governor of the Bank of Canada and the Finance Minister for Canada refer to dead money in the corporate sector. Are you saying they're wrong?
When they say that businesses have more cash balances on hand, that's true. When they say that's dead money or that businesses are not investing, that's not true, because companies are making those investments. In fact, today they need to hold more cash because that's the only way the banks are financing investment on higher cash balances. And so if you look at Figure 5 in the graphs that were distributed, what you see in manufacturing is that cash balances are up slightly, but what is really up are the net capital assets of the sector.
Mr. Myers, are you
so
saying
these are the investments that are taking place.
So are you saying that if the Canadian Bankers Association, who are here representing chartered banks, you'd say that they are being more conservative in their lending now, and that these cash balances are required in order to do debt financing, as an example?
Well, there are a number of reasons. I think it's true that the banks have become more conservative, not in all cases and not necessarily on all projects. But companies have also been drawing from their lines of credit, and that's why they need the short-term assets in the form of cash.
Citizens have been as well. Is there a risk moving towards direct funding and away from, say, the SHRED program, where that governments will be making decisions in terms of which type of research to invest in as opposed to companies?
I don't think governments always make the best decisions in terms of the types of technologies that should be supported. Here, the SHRED program was a program that provided and could provide direct support for the companies that are making the investments in light of the best use of their assets and the best type of research for their businesses that they're undertaking. So I am concerned by a move into more direct spending programs. Some of those are very important. Strategic investment funds, I think, are very important today in a targeted way. But I think we need to be very careful in the way we construct these, so that we do not construct something that is overwhelmed by bureaucracy and administrative costs and overhead, and is not as flexible and is not responding to business requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Mr. Murphy, I'm intrigued by the idea of using RRSP amounts to liberating some of that for investments into cooperatives, and that's something I think as a committee we can take a look at. I have a question on the education side, because we have university teachers here, colleges and universities represented, but also Mr. Odla's presentation as well. I think it's important because the Innu people, the Aboriginal and First Nations people in Canada, this whole issue of education and the imperative of having your fastest growing and youngest population, also the most economically and socially disenfranchised. What level of investment does it really take to fix this? Because if we don't fix it now, it's a time bomb, demographically and socially and economically, if we don't get at this. And what do we need to go back to a Kelowna type discussion again, or call it what you may, but do we need that kind of partnership again, and what level of investment is it going to take to really address this in a substantive way?
Well, I guess I can try and answer that, but as I mentioned earlier from Mr. Marston's question on the strategy that ITK had developed. We're trying to work with the jurisdictions, different jurisdictions across Inuit Nunangat. So you have the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, Northern Quebec, and Newfoundland and Labrador. There have been great strides made towards implementation of the strategy, but we still need federal buy-in to try and get that get it off the ground. We are working continually to try and get Minister Duncan and the Department of A&DC to work with us, but again, jurisdictional matters get in the way, and this is where we're trying to try and make headway.
Thank you, Mr. Odom. I apologize to the other witnesses because the chairman can't allow Mr. Bryson's round to go longer than the other members, and Mr. Bryson can be very verbose from time to time. In any case, perhaps Mr. Hoback wants to continue Mr. Bryson's question.
Yeah, it's a pass-off. I think I did that. Actually, I will, but actually I'm going to go after the financing at cooperatives. I know, Mr. Murphy, this summer when you presented in front of the committee, you talked about the lack of investment institutions, banks, understanding the role of cooperatives and how to properly finance, and that was restricting the growth of some cooperatives in expanding their operations, getting capital for investments, for example, in buildings and other infrastructures. What would you tell this committee in regards to educating us on those hurdles or financial, not financial issues, but the education of the financial sector in the uniqueness of co-ops?
Again, it's an age-old hurdle where we've seen some cooperatives succeed. They figured out how to manage to raise the capital necessary in order to grow and prosper, and others simply, in trying to use, let's call it traditional business models, fail miserably. And again, it comes down, it's almost a case-by-case, person-by-person situation where you approach one particular financial institution, whether it be a bank or a credit union, and you have people that understand your cause and they kind of are able to assist you and navigate you, and other people that might not understand the cooperative model, and therefore it creates the roadblocks. And even within current federal programs, there's many that are technically open to cooperatives, but when you start down that path, suddenly you face a lot of brick walls because the people asking the questions don't understand the cooperative model. Yeah. And the idea of bringing all these people around one table to bring forward an idea. So,
have you looked at using the cooperative strengths across Canada to self-finance amongst other cooperatives? So, you know, for example, the cooperative out of Prince Albert would be maybe putting forward some cash for a smaller cooperative in another region or another area. Have you looked at those types of partnerships?
Well, by all means, there is cooperation among co-ops. From our side at the moment, a few years back, there was, let's call it a legacy where they were hoping to develop a $100 million fund that would self-fund cooperatives. And obviously they were hoping at that time for the federal government to come to the table. And we understand as a sector that, you know, the financial climate has changed dramatically. And at the same time, we as a sector also have to come to the table and say, if we want to do something, we have to show a willingness. So from our end at the moment, we're working internally to try and get a fund off the ground that would self-finance co-ops within and across the country, so that if someone wants to start one up, they can apply to get a fund and to receive capital that way, okay. Knowing full well that they still need to try other areas. It's not just, well, we want to go there. It's, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Davidson, you talked about foreign students and the addition or the importance of foreign students not only coming to Canada, but you also talked about how important it is for us to have our students go abroad. Is there any initiatives that we can look at that need to be tweaked or changed to allow this to happen? Are there any hurdles sitting there that's preventing students from coming into Canada? I know the Governor General was down in Brazil and into the Caribbean promoting Canadian universities, and we are well respected around the world, but I'm just kind of curious, is there anything that we should be doing as far as looking at making that even better?
First of all, in terms of attracting international students to Canada, Canada is known around the world for a very high-quality system. We can never lose sight of that. Things can be improved, but it's a very high-quality system. Secondly, it's an affordable proposition for families around the world to come to Canada. And thirdly, they're welcomed into safe, secure, and welcoming communities right across the country. So those are elements of our competitive advantage in attracting international students to Canada. Also want to underscore the importance of what those international students bring to Canadian classrooms. You know, students who will never travel abroad get the chance to meet people from another country, learn another language, and be engaged in research and learning activities together. In terms of opportunities for, you mentioned the Governor General traveling to Brazil. We were delighted that he led a mission to Brazil along with 30 university presidents. Interesting to see what Brazil is doing. The government of Brazil committed 75,000 scholarships for Brazilian students to study abroad. And then their private sector immediately kicked in another 26,000 scholarships. And they're doing that because they recognize if they're going to take their economy to the next level, they need a generation of young people that have those kinds of international, transnational skills. In the Canadian context, we've got a long way to go. In Amit Chakma's report this summer, the expert panel looking at an international strategy for Canada, he and his colleagues were recommending that Canada aim by 2022 to initiate a program that would move 50,000 Canadian students annually internationally, and that's a goal that we endorse strongly.
So on a per capita basis, that's a substantial number of students then compared to Brazil on a per capita basis.
Thank you, Mr. Kovac. I can't be ruthless with Mr. Bryson and then allow you to go on like that.
Man, you're tough as the other chair.
Mr. Caron,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Caron, please go ahead. Thank you. Mr. Davidson, Mr. Myers. Now, we were talking about the shred. I would like to hear your comments about this. I understand the reason and the motives for the Jenkins report, but for this tax credit, rather than having direct subsidies, are we asking the government to pick winners? Is this a concern for you? By going this route? Mr. Myers, go ahead.
Concern of ours. I think the shred tax credit was one of the reasons it worked was because it provided additional assistance to the companies that were making the investments and making their own decisions about where best to invest in research and development. There are some strategic investments where government should be playing a role. There are some opportunities, for example, the location of the Microelectronics Center in Bromont in Quebec was an excellent example of where the government of Canada, the government of Quebec, both made investments and developed what I think is a world-leading center in microelectronics research, commercialization, and is a very important center for business investment. So governments do have a role to play that I think is extremely important, particularly as everybody else is competing for investment. But we need to provide that funding, but we need also to be able to provide an incentive for the companies that are doing the research and development. I'm not so sure that government is in the best position to do that.
I'll come back to you, but I'd also like to hear what Mr. Davidson thinks of this.
In the mandate of the Jenkins panel, they asked for recommendations that were net zero in terms of additional spending. So Jenkins was asked to move resources around within a fixed pot. I think if there were substantial additional resources, leaving shred the same and putting more resources in another direction may be useful. But in the work that it did, what it found is the shred is one of the most generous tax incentives in the world, and yet it's very difficult to attribute changed behavior in terms of research and innovation using that tax mechanism. They didn't recommend abandoning the mechanism. They recommended adjusting the balance between the tax credit and the direct spend. And that's a recommendation we think would find merit in the research and development ecosystem we have in Canada today.
Mr. Turk, rapidement.
Yes.
Please go ahead, Mr. Turk.
Research and development spending by industry for more than 30 years. The problems have always been similar. That is, it tends to be the large corporations do the bulk of the research and development spending. We have the highest level of foreign ownership.
when Nortel went under, we lost the biggest R&D spender in the country. Right now, I believe RIM is, and it's in some jeopardy. I agree with Paul Davidson that the tax credits have proven to be a very blunt instrument. And although amongst the most generous in the world, have not, in fact, changed the situation fundamentally. There's a variant of direct expenditure, and that is for the government to put the money instead into a grant funding program to which companies can apply and which independent scientific review will determine who funds them.
Merci beaucoup. Mr. Myers, toujours.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. And still about this tax credit, I'd like to know what you think, because you mentioned in your brief, I guess I have 1 minute, is that right? Okay, in 1 minute, what are the consequences of excluding capital expenses in calculating the tax credit for research and development?
For companies like Pratt & Whitney, for Bombardier, for example, for Rio Tinto, that develop prototypes and spend a lot of that, or invest a lot in capital equipment to do that. So I just think we have to be very careful before taking $1 billion out of the shred, $1 billion away from the companies that are making these investments. And all of these companies can move their investment anywhere in the world. We need to compete on that, and the capital expenditures are a very important part of support for research and development through SHRED for manufacturers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Caron.
We have Mr. Adler.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all the witnesses for being here today. I want to begin my questioning with Mr. Myers, if I could. I'm just looking at page 6 of the Management Issues Survey, and I'm seeing that in terms of relations with foreign markets, as you know, we've been very aggressive on the trade front, negotiating 9 free trade agreements since 2006, and we have a number of others in the hopper that we're currently under negotiation. What I'm seeing here in these 2 charts is exactly what I'm seeing in my home riding of York Centre, in that we have a lot of smaller manufacturers, not the General Motors kind, but very small kind of niche marketing manufacturers who are exporting more and more outside of the country. They're not relying so much on the domestic market. And there's very aggressive growth beyond Canada's borders. I see that's a general trend throughout, and I assume you're seeing that throughout your membership?
Yes, we are. What we're seeing today is the need for companies become very, very specialized in the products and services they're producing. And whether that's new technology, new product, new service, the more specialized you are, the larger your market has to be. So they are looking for new market opportunities and markets that fit the product and the service. So Europe is an especially important one for them.
Yeah. And less reliance on the U.S. market also, isn't there?
Less reliance and growth in the U.S. market, but again, the more specialized you are, the deeper you're able to go in the U.S. market. So take E.H. Price from Winnipeg. They've gained 30% of market share in the United States by continuing to invest in new products and develop new services over the past 4 years.
So anything to enhance free trade, in your opinion, speaking on behalf of your membership, and how many members do you have?
We have about 10,000 across the country.
10,000. It's safe to assume probably 100% would be in favor of increased free trade.
Very, very much in favor of opening market opportunities, but also making sure that the rules of the game are followed. You know, making sure that we have good dispute settlement procedures in place.
And how would your membership feel about the $21 billion carbon tax that the NDP is proposing to impose?
Not very good.
Page 4 of their program.
in short, not very good. Look, again, the only way that we are going to be able to reduce emissions is to increase the rate of investment in new technology that is going to get us there. And so before we look at regulations and carbon taxes, let's make sure that we have the right incentive system in place that enables companies to increase those investments in carbon-reducing technologies.
And can I get your thoughts on the Canada-China FIPA?
Well, I think this is, I've seen a lot of remarks in the press lately. I think a lot of the concerns are extremely overblown. I think what we're looking at here is an agreement where we have a better sense of how Canadian investment will be treated in China, and where we know that Chinese investment, when it comes to Canada, will be subject to the laws and the regulations here in Canada. That's kind of the basis for any foreign investment treaty, and this provides Canadian investors and Canadian companies operating in China with a lot more assurance that their businesses will be treated fairly in that market.
Yeah, and pretty much codifies. I mean, we're seeing an increase in Canadian investment in China. Certainly, China's interested in the Canadian market, but it tends to, the FIPA sort of codifies, the natural sort of movement of things, does it not? That's an important thing to do.
That's very important, and it also provides a basis. This isn't just a bilateral. I think whether it's investment or trade, we have to see this not just as a bilateral relationship. This is what Canadian companies are doing now, are making investments around the world, but their market is global. They'll be partnering with a Chinese company, making an investment in China, making an investment in Mexico, but working on a worldwide basis. And that's why we need a series of investment agreements that work together to give them assurance of where they put their money, that they are being treated fairly.
How much time do I have left?
You have 18 seconds.
18 seconds. Okay. Okay, I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hedler. Et maintenant, Mr. Bromley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Boyd, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to tell Mr. Myers, and I think several of us here are fairly embarrassed that we're trying to use you in this little partisan skirmish, and in asking you to comment on partisan activities and actions on the other side, across the table. It's fairly embarrassing to ask you to come here and testify and share your skill and expertise with us, and instead use you as a pawn in this little skirmish. So, I have a question to ask Mr. Murphy. You mentioned in your intervention that sometimes cooperatives must ask that their files be processed, and then it doesn't get processed. The fact that you're asking for a transfer to be transferred from one department to another between agriculture and industry, does that have something to do with that comment? To some extent, yes, but more importantly, I would say that moving from Agriculture Canada to Industry Canada is because of the history of cooperatives. Over the last few years, the government had to assign co-ops to one department or another. At that time, there were many agricultural co-ops, so it made sense at that time to place them under Agriculture Canada. But now, given the enormous growth in the cooperative sector in Canada, Agriculture Canada is no longer able to meet all of our needs, and with the last budget, some people may use the word cutback of our one and only federal program, but at the same time, the program had existed for 10 years. It was over and done with, and we understood that. Agriculture Canada couldn't invest funds in co-ops that wasn't actually they weren't actually practicing agriculture. So we viewed this as an opportunity to transform our partnership with the federal government. Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Davidson. You mentioned that we should make greater efforts to attract foreign students to come and study in Canadian universities. I completely agree with that. There's another aspect that has been perhaps less discussed, though. I know that in Quebec, and I'm not sure if it's the case in all Canadian provinces, but we also need to attract more boys into Canadian universities. Do you think this is a problem that is typically from Quebec, or is that true everywhere across the country? Does the federal government, within its budgetary approach, and could the federal government participate in helping the provinces ensure that boys are more tempted to go to university and that they drop out less in fewer numbers than they are currently.
Education in the last 30 years is the full participation of women in the post-secondary sector. And in many cases, in many programs, women are outnumbering and in many cases outperforming the men. So that's interesting to observe. I don't know if there's an underlying sociological reason for that. But if I may, I would add that one of our biggest concerns is there's a lot of discussion about, do we have too many people in PSE? Do we have too many people in university? The short answer is no. We need every student that's in the system now to stay in the system, and we need a whole lot more. Yes, we've got a skills crisis for skilled trades, and we need to do more on the skilled trade side. But there are job shortages in Alberta right now because of not being able to find the university grads that are needed for that, for the economic conditions of that province. And with respect to the situation in Quebec, everyone should be concerned that the post-secondary participation rate in Quebec is amongst the lowest in the country, and that's a challenge for Quebec. It's a challenge for all of Canada.
Et comment est-ce que vous pensez justement que le gouvernement fédéral
And how do you think the Canadian government, through financial incentives, could help reestablish that deficit that Quebec has, as compared to certain other provinces? And Mr. Turk, please feel free to answer as well.
I think that the variation in percentage of women and men in different programs is considerable. While there are in education and nursing and certain other programs of significant plurality of women, there are other programs where fewer than 20% of the students studying in those fields are women: chemistry, physics, engineering. So there's enormous variation. I think the challenge is how universities and how the government can assist universities and colleges in opening up programs to everyone and overcome some of these historical gender differences. I think that generally the message that's been coming out around employment equity hasn't been helpful. Effectively defanging the federal contractors program is not any encouragement.
Mr. Turk, we have to move on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Brahmi. And now we're going to hear from Mr. Van Kesteren.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here. It's good to see some of you again. You've been here a number of times. Mr. Davison, I want to just touch on what you were just saying to Mr. Brahmi. You mentioned and you thought that we don't have enough students. I'm looking for a clarification because we've heard other testimony, and I think it's statistically proven that we are having a large number of graduates out of universities that can't find jobs. Is the problem maybe that we're not putting them in the right programs? And I say that very carefully because now we're starting to talk about social engineering almost to some degree, and I see Mr. Turk is agreeing with that as well too. Like how do we find that balance? And I'm going to just shift that over to Mr. Turk after that, but I have a question in regards to that, if you could.
I welcome the question. Let me just say first off, in terms of jobs, since July 2008 to July 2012, there have been 700,000 net new jobs for university graduates. There have been 320,000 jobs for college graduates, and there have been 640,000 jobs lost for those with only high school. So we do have some issues to face. But the idea that university graduates are not getting jobs is not borne out by evidence. 94% of graduates in Ontario report having a job within 6 months of graduation. For anyone that doesn't have a job, it is a terrible issue to face. And there's more we can do to make sure that young people connect to the labor force, and there's more that universities are doing to prepare students for careers. But to suggest that too many people are going to university is really a strategy not for success but for failure. I might add, because we look at international rankings and standards, that university enrollment in Canada ranks 15th, that's 1-5, in the OECD. Because although we've increased enrollment by about 60% in the last 15 years, which is the equivalent of creating the largest university in each province again, and then building another University of Toronto, although we've increased the enrollment that much in the last 15 years, Other countries are increasing enrollment further and faster, and we're looking at our competitive countries. I spoke of 1 million graduates in Canada. China increased enrollment by 1 million graduates in the last 12 months.
Those are interesting statistics, and I'm glad you shared those with us. Maybe you could provide the committee with those numbers. Mr. Turk, part of the problem, I think we probably spoke back in industry days. Part of the problem with a lot of the grant money, when we did a large cross-country tour at some of the universities, there's obviously some great research coming on. But you hear the charge over and over. You've heard it probably more than me. This is wonderful, but what's it good for? And so there was always that issue of the government determining what should be, where the money should go, as opposed to the freedom that traditionally universities have in their research. How do we solve that? I know we've asked this question again. I'm just wondering if you could just, for this committee, give an answer, maybe.
Thank you for the question. None of these questions that persist year after year are easy to solve. It starts with an analysis of where you think the most important outcomes arise from. And it's, I think, a self-evident but wrong conclusion to say the way you get the kind of outcomes, whether it be commercial advances, innovation, or whatever, is by directing research to that target. If one looks historically at where most of the things that have come to be recognized as having commercial, economic, or even social value, they've come out of basic research, where the researcher at the time they undertook the research had no idea. One of the most respected scientists I know in the country says every time I fill out a grant application I have to lie because it's asking where is this research going to lead. I don't know where it's going to lead, but as we indicated in our report, we just addressed this briefly. You know, the discoveries of X-rays, nylon, Teflon, GPS technology, and so forth, all came out of basic research, and so it's not just giving it to let scientists do whatever they want. It's rather giving the money to granting council so there's a rigorous peer review process, so it's the scientific and research community that makes the determination as to what looks valuable, not political officials, not bureaucratic officials, not university bureaucratic officials, but rather the scientific community that makes those difficult judgments.
How much time do I have left, Chair?
That's it. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much.
Maintenant, Madame Michaud, c'est votre tour.
Madame Michaud, it's now your turn. Thank you. I would like to thank my Conservative colleague for having raised the issue of basic research, because that was what I wanted to ask you about. So could you please continue, Mr. Turk, in the same vein? Sorry, I'm just getting over a little bout of bronchitis. You spoke in your brief about, and you denounced rather, the various cutbacks in the area of research, university research, government scientific research. I'm a member of the Official Languages Committee. We can already see what happened in Statistics Canada with the cutbacks there, and now that we can see that the data is not as reliable in terms of how many people speak French as a mother tongue, etc. Now, what do you think about basic research? Could you please give your comments on that and carry on with what you were saying before? And if anyone else has anything to add, they may do so afterwards.
Role to play in facilitating creative, innovative research. It does that by giving money to the granting councils. It does it by giving money through other programs, and it does so by enabling the knowledge base in the society. That's why we've been particularly concerned with what we see to be the dismemberment of Library and Archives Canada. Our ability to know our history and to study it and to learn from it is being seriously damaged. We have a website, savelac.ca, that goes into considerable detail, more than I have time to even begin to address here. That's why we were so concerned about the elimination of the mandatory long-form census. There's just all sorts of research and information that businesses, communities, and researchers need that just simply is not available. So that's one side. In terms of the funding for the granting councils, I certainly understand from a politician's point of view how it makes sense to say, well, we have this need in this area, let's concentrate our research dollars there. But the problem is, and again, if one looks historically, there's just a mountain of evidence, I'm glad to share it with the committee, that says ideas that are being investigated by some obscure researcher looking at molecular variations that seems unrelevant to anything turned out to result in a Nobel Prize, and also for that researcher, his name was Paul Berg at Stanford, to be the basis of the entire biotech industry today. So, I mean, the difficulty here is there is pressure. You have limited resources. You want to make sure they're spent best. I guess what we're suggesting, the best way you can achieve that objective is by giving the money through the granting council so that it's scientific and research expertise that makes those difficult decisions. It's virtually impossible for the rest of us to do that. That means also ensuring that the people you appoint to the governing councils of each of the funding agencies are active researchers and scientists. The percentage of them that are has been diminishing over the last decade, and that's a concern.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry I have to interrupt. I did have another question for Mr. Murphy. Durant votre présentation, vous nous avez parlé de l'importance.
During your testimony, you talked about the importance of setting up a national investment fund for new cooperatives and existing cooperatives to help them carry on what they do. This is a subject that interests me a lot. I come from Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. There are many co-ops there. I would like you to tell us more about that fund and what you would expect from the government to help you in your undertakings. Yes, as I was saying earlier, within the co-op sector, for many years now, the sector knew that if we wished to attract funds for the development of new co-ops or for smaller co-ops, that it would be up to us to begin the process, so to speak. So today, what we would like to do is to begin the process, to set up a fund, but then in an ideal world, we would like to develop a partnership with the federal government, allowing the government to come to the table with us, and in a perfect world, with money, of course, in hand, and so increase the fund. It's not that we're going to come to them every year for money. We have members today who are already looking. For example, in Northern Canada, there's a fund. I think they started off with $2 million, and now the fund is up to $10 or $13 million, and that has existed for the last 15 years. So that was one shot. That was it, and then one thing led to another, and it just got bigger and bigger. So this is what we would like to see at the national level. Do I have any time left? That's it? All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses for coming today. Something you'd said, Mr. Turk, struck me, and you mentioned technology and GPS, and I'm not sure if you mentioned fax technology and some other things. And most of those things, of course, were invented by the military complex of the United States. And I'm wondering if you're not advocating for more military investment, are you, sir? So we get more inventions, because that's where most of them came from. So I'm just kind of curious.
Well, let me tell you a quick story. I want to answer your question directly.
Okay.
Noam Chomsky, who is not known as a friend of the military, gave a talk at Carleton University 2 years ago where he talked about he'd been at MIT for the last 35, 40 years. And during the first half, 2/3 of his time, the bulk of the funding at MIT was from the Pentagon. More recently, it's been corporate.
You did say short.
I am.
Okay.
The military funding funded basic research and allowed the scientists to pursue their research. He said one of the changes is it's become more corporate research. There's been more attempt to direct their research. So in fact, many of these things did come out of military research, but they came out of military funding for basic research.
Okay, I'm just asking, are you advocating more military investment? Are you advocating
If it's for basic research, that's okay.
Okay. Now, you edited a book called Corporate Campus Commercialization and the Dangers to Canadian Colleges and Universities. Do you believe in what was in that book?
I edited the book. I take responsibility for what I wrote. I don't necessarily agree with everything that everybody else wrote.
Okay.
I thought it was worth considering.
Because I was, it struck me as
we believe in academic freedom and a diversity of voices to generate a discussion.
I noticed there was about 10 authors, and you edited it. But some of the things that struck me interesting was some of the comments made in it about the public interest needs to be protected, and more or less that universities should be making the choices, and those that are educated in the field should be making the choices. If I can finish.
Okay.
But from my perspective, what I've seen been successful in my area of Fort McMurray, which is, I think, listening to Mr. Adala, it seems that he's 30 years back from where Fort McMurray was, or Fort McMurray 30 years ago was where his community is, and I would encourage you to look at Fort McMurray's models. But that hard work and creativity and results should be rewarded, and I think that's ultimately what I take difference of opinion from what I read in some of the book's contents. And I'm wondering what you would comment on that, because Fort McMurray, for instance, just over the last little while, has the highest employment rate for Aboriginals in the country, 15% for some plant sites, some have 10%. They employ literally thousands of Aboriginals that have grade 12 or grade 10 educations and do a proactive Aboriginal training program with the high schools and with the colleges. And in fact, it is commercially driven, but the success rate of, for instance, the Aboriginal population is tremendous, and even the highest household income in the country is there in Fort McMurray, and those are people that do not have university educations or jobs, and they're adding 7 or 8% to the GDP. And I see Mr. Myers is nodding his head in agreement. Could you comment on that, Mr. Myers?
Well, I think we certainly need universities, and we need highly qualified personnel coming out of universities, but we also, I think, need to be able to develop the technical and the skilled production workers, and we need to be able to connect people who perhaps don't have technical skills to employment opportunities. Over the next 10 years, this country is going to be faced with a tremendous skills people shortage, not just skill shortage, and yet we have these mismatches of people who have gone to school in one area and where their job opportunities in another. I think we need better mechanisms to connect.
And that was going to be my next series of questions, actually. And I was wondering if you have any suggestions regarding mobility, because obviously reducing the barriers to mobility, like the Red Seal program, but travel tax credits, living tax credits, in my mind, to drive people from one place to another, at least on a temporary basis. I sit with literally hundreds of people every week going back and forth to Fort McMurray that are from all over the country, and I talked to one gentleman here from southwestern Ontario, and he told me that he makes $200,000 a year there. He wouldn't make $60,000 full-time employed where he is currently located, and just can't say enough of good things about Fort McMurray and the mobility, but would like to have some form of tax credit or encouragement to involve him in different places around the country. Do you have any comments or suggestions on tax credits or travel tax credits or things like that you've heard that could be successful?
Well, yeah, I think whether it's a travel tax credit or a tax credit for mobility, I think might be a very interesting measure. One of the problems, of course, is that people flying from the Maritimes to Fort McMurray or anywhere are sitting on a house that they can't necessarily sell in the Maritimes. There are all sorts of reasons why we have mobility problems. We're working in a number of areas, extending Red Seal to basic employability skills, doing that with Canadian Labour Council. They're trying to identify standards product standards, work standards that act as barriers to labour mobility. I think all of these are
Thank
important.
you, Mr. Myers.
We do need a concerted national approach, I think, to all of these issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Myers and Mr. Jean, and now Ms. Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, thanks to all the witnesses for being here. I'm going to continue with Mr. Myers for just a moment. Mr. Myers, I appreciate the accelerated capital cost allowance suggestion that you've made. The permanency of it is what you've suggested. But what I'm wondering is if you can help us understand, in a time when we're trying to return to balanced budgets, I mean, we have to look at, if we're going to inject a program like this that's going to require more funding, is there somewhere that you see we could scale back in order to afford this without having to raise taxes, those kinds of things? Is there anywhere that you might suggest we might scale back because the program that we've got in place just isn't working?
I think it's very important to understand that the accelerated capital cost allowance is a cash flow issue. It's not necessarily a major investment issue. The companies that depreciate all of their equipment then begin to pay tax, so the government begins to collect that tax after 3 years, and the longer the measure is in place, the less money it actually costs the government to extend it. Are there other areas that we can scale back? I think we do need what the Jenkins Committee was intended to do, which is a full review of our support programs, not just for business investment in R&D, but for all federal investments in R&D here. I think we really do need to set for federal money going into R&D programs across the country. We need to figure out what are the objectives, what do we want as a result of those, are we doing this in the best way, in the best coordinated way, and make investment in machinery, equipment, technology a part of that review as well. I certainly see...
I have a couple of other questions, so I'm sorry
Sure.
to interrupt, but I'm interested in the voucher program that you mentioned in your recommendations. And your organization is fantastic at producing different charts and so on and so forth. Have you actually put down in writing the voucher program? Because it might save us some time. I'd really like to explore it. I'm not going to have time in 2 minutes.
Sure.
But I'd love to see how you envision it working, because it makes sense, just the suggestion, but I don't know how you would put it in place and how much it might cost.
Well, I don't really think it would cost anything more than is already being made available. What we're suggesting here is that instead of funding directly being provided to colleges or universities for research, at least some of that funding be made available to businesses to then invest in the research or the support services that they need for innovation. So it's an issue more of redirecting funds than providing more money. And all this is doing is really providing the money to the businesses to make the decisions themselves, rather than to strengthen the demand for the good research that is happening in our universities and colleges, rather than to try to push the research out into the marketplace.
Okay, very good. A quick question. I'm hoping I have time for Mr. Davidson. You mentioned about international students. What are the barriers for us to attract those Brazilian students who now have the scholarships? How can we open up so that we're receiving most of those?
Well, Canada's doing very well on the Brazil file by having the Governor General, along with 2 ministers of cabinet and a number of backbench MPs and 30 presidents going together. The government of Brazil committed to send 12,000 students to Canada. We are the second largest beneficiary, second only to the United States, of the program, and it represents an investment by the government of Brazil of about $500 million for sending their students to Canada. That's just one example. You asked about barriers. One of the ongoing challenges is to ensure the successful processing of visas. It sounds mundane and mechanical, but we have seen significant increases in demand in India, China, Brazil, and other target markets, and with that, resources are necessary to ensure the visas are processed in a timely way, because we're in a competitive race with other countries in terms of issuing of visas and getting the students here. That's just one of the barriers. I could go on, but I know time is...
And is the Brazilian program the one where you mentioned about 75,000 scholarships and whatnot, and the 26,000 that came from private sector? Do you know how much the scholarships are that they're providing? I'm curious to know how much it would cost for us to do it.
I will get you a dollar figure, but it includes transportation, accommodation, tuition for the year. It's a 1-year scholarship, and they need to return to Brazil, and it's for both undergraduate students and for PhD students.
I'd be very curious to see the stats on it and
Absolutely.
see how we might be able to look at it.
Terrific. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Glover, and thank you to each of you for being with us today and for your interventions, and really great panel, and wish we had more time, particularly thinking about these issues around post-secondary education, Aboriginal and First Nations people, the honor of skilled trades, and takes more than an hour and a half at the Finance Committee, but we really appreciate the quality of your interventions today and hope that we can reflect that quality in our report. Thank you. Members, that's